Well, happy Sunday, SMITE fans, and welcome to the final day of Week 2 of Phase 2 of the SPL here in Season 7. Dolson and Mifflin will walk you through set number 1. Miff, a good day of SPL action yesterday, sort of saunters us in here to Sunday. Radiance versus Sanguine to start us off, SSG versus Obey to round out the day. So a good slate of action for us here on this fine Sunday.
It looks like it's going to be pretty hot. I mean, I know what everyone's saying, and in the fan group, in the backstage with the casters, they're all saying, yeah, we might be looking at a 3-game set into a quick 2-0 stomp, but I don't think you can count out either one of these sets for high-octane gameplay.
You don't think, Mifflin?
No.
I'm going to get to that here in a moment. The standings might tell us otherwise here. United, of course, falling yesterday, down to 0-3. Obey trying to stave that off here today against SSG a little bit later on. Sanguine at 1-1 have stumbled over their last game. I guess they've only played twice, so they stumbled once up against Radiance, who are yet to fall in one of their matchups. So let's talk about this first one here, Mifflin. And I kind of want to open things up. I think in Phase 1, we talk about Sanguine. We're discussing how they're far and away this late-game team that kind of blows everyone else out of the water. Their team fighting is just too consistent. They beat Renegades. A little shaky, though, in that one. And then they lose earlier on this week in an 0-2 set to SSG. Now they've got Radiance, another fantastic team in the late game. So if you're looking at Sanguine and how they're playing here in Phase 2, are they still the best late-game team?
See, that's a little bit of a harder question. Just if we were to evaluate them holistically, I think we've seen enough from Sanguine that we could trust them come late game. But with just these last two couple of sets where they're just looking a little bit shaky with their teamwork, maybe a little bit uncohesive, I'd say, if they're able to bring it back and play to the peak that we know that they are capable of, I think they've definitely earned the title of best late game team fight team. But right now, I think we might be leaning a little bit more towards PK, maybe even towards SSG, just because they're starting to look a lot better. But I'm not willing to count Sanguine out, but I won't give them the title either.
I guess it's sort of that weather versus climate kind of debate. You know, the weather goes up and down, but, you know, climate's trending in one specific direction, however you want to look at it. So, really, that's to say Sanguine has looked shaky. It's not the most consistent team maybe in the late game, but not ready to count them out just yet. I still think this is a team with high levels of coordination. They've been able to find, you know, a 2-0 over an admittedly strong team in what we're seeing out of the Renegades. So high expectations, flexibility in picks and bans, I think that's important to look at as well here with Sanguine. Let's talk a little bit about Radiance, though, Mifflin, and what they've brought to the table so far this phase. Haven't stumbled just yet, 2-0 over PK, won their previous matchup before that, 2-0. This team's looking consistent and very hard to beat.
They're also looking a lot more versatile. In Phase 2, the God picks for almost every single role have been a lot more diverse from Radiance, and their strategies have been a lot more diverse. Sometimes they're able to win out in the early game, and they're able to push that lead a la Ghost, and then other times we see them get the old, well, we got blown out in the early, let's do a whole PK where we just hang out until 40 minutes and then win the game. I think Radiance is definitely a huge threat, and a lot of it is really through the support, I think. And I'm glad that we're seeing a little bit of a Roar's Clips here. I mean, this guy has been looking highly consistent. I don't think I've seen him miss a pull punch yet this season.
Yeah, I loved the kind of mindset of, you know, we're going to ban out Aurora, ban out this Hercules, let's get him uncomfortable. And it did, in large part. But his chance then back on the Hercules in this set against the Knights, and he looked absolutely fantastic. And Miff, I know you're going to love to talk about adapting the jungler who's made a massive impact here for this team. So what have you liked from adapting here recently?
Well, just quick order of business. You're going to start calling him Adapt King from now on. And I've seen just fantastic team play. I mean, he blinked in front of a Neathult to block it to save Benji's life. That's
and then
phenomenal.
What happened?
Well, then Benji walked over to a buff and died. But we're not going to talk about that because we're talking about Adapt King. I'm not going to let Benji tarnish his name. There was just such good play coming from him. He's playing Nemesis a lot right now, but he's playing it a lot differently. We're not seeing him itemize towards Golden Blade. He's going more for this ability-focused Nemesis build, which allows him to get involved a lot earlier on, and he's been doing it masterfully. And I think Adapting is just this versatile player who maybe got a little bit of a worse rap as the seasons go on. He was once hailed as the absolute best in the world, and I think right now in Season 7, he's trying to prove that he still is.
Yeah, Adapting versus Panatom. That's going to be one to watch here in this matchup today. Of course, Adapting and the rest of Radiance have been playing fantastically, but Biggie is the one behind the scenes pulling a lot of those strings. We were able to sit down with the head coach of Radiance prior to this big game and see how they're feeling.
All right, we've got Biggie, coach of Radiance, joining us now. Biggie, a big matchup this week up against Sanguine, and this is a Sanguine team that didn't exactly look their best the other day in their matchup earlier on this week. What did you see from them that you think that you can exploit here today?
I think they definitely don't look as strong as they have in the past. Maybe they're a little just kind of out of form, just settling back into the new season. I know they seem to be a team that isn't as disciplined as they maybe first were when they first came into the league. So it might just take them after a month off a bit of time to kind of warm back into, we gotta be up and practicing and taking the practice seriously, stuff like that. I would just say overall they just didn't look as sharp as a team or as strong. I wouldn't say it was anyone kind of too individually like just playing terribly, just an overall performance issue right now.
Yeah, and I think you guys are kind of on the other side of the coin. You had a great playoff run after a little bit of a rocky phase one, and now you've started off 2-0 here in phase number 2. Is there anything that you can tell has been really different with your team, or do you think it's just been time and maturing together?
Well, I think before playoffs we kind of not hit rock bottom because I feel like we did well. I mean, we finished 5th, which isn't great considering the roster I think we have, but I think it was the week leading into MSI or the playoffs. We kind of, the first day of scrims, I think a lot of things kind of were built up and just, I feel like people finally just said what they were thinking about how people were playing on the team and what they weren't happy with, and it kind of was like a wake-up call, and then we had a pretty decent week of scrims, and then I felt like we played the best kind of I'd seen us ever play. Our comms as well sit around the map. So I feel like we still have a lot to build on from that. The final obviously didn't go the way we wanted, but considering how the split went, it was kind of promising. So now we're kind of just building on that, and we also don't have as many background distractions because at the start of last split we did well, but we kind of were switching orgs, and a lot of things happened behind the scenes with like gear and computers, and we were switching in and out, and we just never felt settled. And I feel settled. I've kind of everything's working behind the scenes again, which is nice.
Well, it's clearly working on the battleground as well. Big, you guys are looking great. Hopefully that continues today up against Sanguine. Good luck.
Thank you.
Hey, if this isn't Radiance at full strength, the rest of the league might need to keep their eyes out. Before we jump into picks and bans, though, Mifflin, I want to bring you back in. One final kind of thought on this matchup as a whole. How do you think these two teams' play styles match up against one another?
Well, Sanguine has a very one-trick playstyle, which has been that we're going to play for late game, we're going to group up, we're going to try and fight each other, and I think we really only see Sanguine stumble when they kind of get swept away by the early game pace. I'll say this, if Sanguine establishes a 1,000 gold lead pre-10 minutes ever, they almost always lose that game because they're looking to get overly aggressive in the enemy jungle, whereas Radiance is a lot more diverse on their approach. Sometimes they do win in the early game and they're able to pull through and actually grow their lead. Sometimes they win in the late. I think that these teams have a 50-50 matchup. Whether or not Radiance decides to actually beat Sanguine in the early might actually be a double-edged sword. It's so hard to predict when you're talking about teams of this caliber, though.
I agree. Depends what type of game these two teams bring to the table on game day. And that's what we've got right now. Picks and bans are going to dictate a lot of how we feel, I think, about this matchup. From what we saw from Panatom and adapting as well, I think Nemesis was one of the big thoughts that we both had in this jungle matchup. How contested do you imagine she might be here in this set?
Look, we know that Panatom can play it, we know that Adapting can play it, but both of these guys have diverse god pools. Adapting might look to pull out his Daji that we haven't quite seen in Phase 2. Panatom can bring out the Thor, Susanoo, all these other picks. I think Nemesis is only going to be as contested as highly as however much these teams value it, but with gods like Persephone and Olorun and Freya,
True.
I think that might really be where the priority's at.
Well, the Aurora does not get to play Hercules. Woes continue for the Radiance support as Sanguine. Enough fear in that pick to ban it out first overall. Cthulhu as well continues to find his way into the ban column. Really with Cthulhu, Mifflin, it seemed like he had this 1 week data collection event last weekend where teams really saw what Cthulhu was able to do. Even now, after bonus balance, some changes. I don't know the next time we're going to get to see him let through.
Oh, we saw him yesterday just a little bit. It seems like if you're
Right.
playing against EU United, well, let's let it through. Maybe Snoopy takes it into support, which I guess if you're Finch, you're going to say is not his best role. I think Cthulhu has so much strength and versatility. I think he's one of the best space-controlling gods in the game. Obviously, his ultimate is almost a moving no-play zone, as wherever he is, you really don't want to be. Knock you up 5 times, deal immense damage,
big.
and heal his entire team at the same time. I think really as far as the SPL goes, they need to be proven or about these gods. They need to see that,
Right.
this god's actually really good at this level of play before they're willing to ban it out, which is why we saw Cthulhu let through the majority of week 1. It's probably going to be a pretty decent amount of time until we see it let through consistently.
Fair enough. I absolutely agree here, and I think you could say the same, really, about Oleron and Freya. Those have been proven consistently here in the first few weeks. It's been interesting kind of to follow that magical ADC conversation. Obviously, Oleron and Freya still carrying that weight. A couple of teams opting to kind of drop down to that. I mean, I was talking to Gore this morning. I don't know if it's a full tier down, but, maybe a step down in that soul. Hasn't brought the same ban phase presence as, of course, Oleron and Freya have. Yamoja, though, Mifflin here getting let through. I suppose that's a byproduct of the Camazotz and the Hercules being banned out there for Sanguine, so it's a great get for Radiance with their first pick.
Yeah, I mean, Aurora and PBM are the Hercules and Yamoja brothers in my mind. They love that aggressive playstyle, and this is a god that facilitates it greatly. Split up the team fights with the ultimate, not to mention the sustain. I feel like the sustain is something we've been sleeping on a little bit, but just out-of-combat healing from Yamoja around these Fire Giant fights or elongated Gold Fury dances is so hugely impactful that it's no surprise to me that Radiance are prioritizing this god.
Right, it's the old, well, you're going to ban out the Hercules, and we'll have to see if Aurora can carry the same weight on the Yamoja, and I sure think he can. Now, Bellona, an interesting pick here, Mifflin. 0% pick rate, 0% ban rate. So this is our first point of data on Bellona here. What do you think Radiance moving towards her?
I think there's a reason we haven't really seen her just yet. There's no data points because her strengths, although they do exist, are very niche. The disarm is likely the best part of her kit, or maybe the ability to block some autos. But short of that, her bludgeon is such a hard-to-channel ability, it's very easily canceled out. But with the meta as it is, with all these auto attackers out of the jungle, mid, and the hunter role, Bellona could see a lot of value. It's just she's so execution-centric. She doesn't really have the same level of lockdown as the majority of warriors that you see come out of Soul Lane. I'm really worried about how well she's going to be able to perform. I know that Ducky in particular is a huge fan of this god, but, Ducky's on Obey, so what can we say about that?
Yeah, I wonder where Bellona here falls here in this meta for Radiance. Obviously somewhere on that priority totem pole, second overall pick. Now the second wave of bans starting up here. Before we get to the next round of picks, though, Mifflin, I think Cupid has drawn a lot of attention over the last couple of weeks. I think the name escapes me. One SPL Pro notably saying he's just broken. So Cupid obviously in the eye of a lot of these SPL pros. How about you?
I think you might be quoting Ven, but I might just be saying that because he
might
made
have been
it
Ven.
look so
I don't know why.
actually broken in mid. He's a strong pick right now, especially with these team fights. Fields of Love has been getting a lot of value, and I think a lot of it's due to the fact that we've seen kind of Heavenly Agility fall out of favor a little bit. We're really starting to see more shells get picked up, and without Heavenly, it's a lot easier for you to land that ability. His free heals in the team fight, which is very nice, and recent itemization changes have really assisted Cupid a lot. This is a god that benefits greatly from having cooldown reduction in his kit, which beforehand, back in Season 6 or even Phase 1 of Season 7, was a little bit harder to come by. Transcendence was really the only item you could look towards. But now you've got items like Fail Not. They're going to help you get your crit, your penetration, your cooldown. Atalanta's Bow being this fantastic stat stick for hunters in general. I think a lot of that is contributing to why we're seeing some more Cupid.
Well, Miff, I know you're just too humble a person to really gas yourself, so I'll give you props. You look into your crystal ball, you say maybe the Daji comes out. It's a 5% ban rate, as always seen from Daji so far in Phase 2 here of the SPL. Poseidon as well, hovering around that low pick rate. So one predicted pick there and one unconventional lock-in for Radiance round out their final two.
Radiance's draft looks good to me. They have a lot of beads burners. Yamoja's going to have a good time burning beads. Bellona herself might be able to do it with her ultimate. Poseidon's likely going to be able to burn some beads with his cripple. Cupid's going to do the exact same. And if your beads are down, Daji is going to get value no matter what, especially considering that Merlin doesn't have CC immunity as ultimate, neither does Nemesis, neither does Terra. So these are all targets that are going to have to be highly wary of adapting in the jungle. But that doesn't mean that Sanguine didn't get a fantastic draft themselves. They're playing the meta. They're playing those top pick gods that they're always known for. Heimdall, incredibly safe. Nemesis has been getting huge value out of the jungle. Amaterasu with that dazzling offensive is one of the best initiators in the game. It's going to be a very good set.
So you think, no winners or losers out of the draft? It just comes down to execution for game number 1?
It's just this Bellona pick is such a huge question mark for me, Dave,
I agree.
man. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it's going to perform. But if I had to talk about just like the all-time lows of these picks, like the variability and how well they're going to perform, I think Sanguine picked a much more consistent draft, whereas Radiance is really putting a lot on themselves to execute perfectly.
Yeah, Sanguine, they've had a rough last couple of games, standing at 1-1 here in the standings through 2. Radiance shot out of a cannon so far here in Phase 2. I think this is a big one. Sanguine have had themselves a lot of tough opponents in the first few weeks. Radiance is going to be one that'll certainly give them a fight as well. Game number 1, Radiance versus Sanguine. It's Finch and Aggro on the mic.
Thanks, Dolson and Mifflin on the desk. We indeed are moving down to one of the bigger sets of this week. Radiance up against Sanguine and Aggro. I think we do kind of have to discuss this Bellona a little bit. They weren't quite so sure on her value, but I don't know, man. I might be sold. The block stacks, the disarm. I mean, up against Panatom or even maybe Netroid, Benji should be able to get some good value here.
I agree, but there have been a lot of auto attack characters that have been in the meta over the past, 2 years since Bellona has been any sort of value pick for anybody? It's not like this is the only time where auto attacking has been really important. It's not been the only time that Freya has been the top pick in the meta, and still Bellona didn't see play. So maybe now, with the fact that Berserkers and Glad Shield are gone, because Bellona was kind of in this awkward middle ground where she was okay with both but fantastic with neither, now she can really go back to her identity, which is bullying you in the laning phase and really winning that laning phase hard. I think that's going to be kind of difficult against Yarkor's Ama. Ama, a character that stalemates lanes really well and can rotate really effectively, so that might be a little bit problematic for Benji, but I like the idea of the Bellona. I'm just a little bit skeptical. I don't know if her power level as a god is really this good, especially where they picked it. They picked the top 3.
Yeah, they did. I mean, certainly that's a pick they could have gotten later on in the draft, perhaps, and perhaps gotten Sanguine to ban something else out or waste and ban some other spots. That part of it, I think I'm right alongside you in terms of maybe getting a little too valued, but certainly strong in terms of the laning phase. And if their identity is to try and bully out over here at the solo a little bit, maybe look for some buffs and phase, something like that. Bellona is so good at it. You're not going to fall behind in lane with this pick, man. She is always looking to fight.
She just has so many more buttons that feel like they're impactful in the laning phase, that they all deal damage. Getting those auto attack resets off is really, really strong. Of course, the cleave to clear the wave is fantastic, but she just has a lot of tools, a little bit of built-in sustain that you can get to be a little bit stronger if you decide to level Scourge. So she definitely has tools. It just feels like not enough has changed over there to bring her back, but like I said, maybe the lack of the tier 2 shields is enough.
It's true, you don't have to buy that early on, and perhaps we might still see Bellona go into it later on. I feel like Soul Eater has become kind of a popular item over here in the solo lane for some of these to pick up, some of these solo lanes to pick up. I don't know if necessarily that's the route that we'll be seeing Benji going, but I'll be keeping my eyes on for sure what exactly he elects to build. But Radiance, that's not even the only thing I think about worth talking about. We have not seen a lot of Poseidon lately here Aggro,
Yep.
and really Psycho's been playing a lot more Cupid too, so I think either of those would certainly make for another good place to spend some time.
I really like the Poseidon pick here for Tings, and I think that this adjustment from a god that we haven't seen a whole lot recently does make more apparent sense to me with what is in the meta. I think that Poseidon is one of those picks that can give Nemesis some degree of trouble because of that cripple, because of the knockup as well on the ultimate. I think that you have more opportunities to counterplay with Poseidon than a lot of other mid laners against someone like a Nemesis. She's still way more mobile than you, even with all the movement speed that Poseidon has. It won't be enough to outright get away from Nem all by himself, but he trades and fights pretty well, and I think that with the setup of the Cupid ult and what you have from Aurora and the stun lockdown that he can provide, Poseidon has a chance to have a pretty impactful game here.
Well, another part of the big discussion, aggro, on the desk was where are we going to see these two teams sort of look to get aggressive? I think we all kind of expect that Sanguine's probably going to be waiting till later on in the game. But Radiance are a bit on the wild card side. We've seen them go late, and we've seen them steamroll teams early. Can you kind of tell just from the drafts where you might be expecting to see some action here in this game?
From Sanguine's draft, they want to go real late because they just have to be grouped as 5 in order to get the full value out of this composition. Their 3v3 in mid is okay, but not fantastic. The Rongyu just gets more and more value every time another Radiance member shows up because that means his ult is going to get better because it's such a wide area that it affects. I think that Sanguine clearly want to group up, 25, 30 minutes in and start taking fights around that time, using that Ama aura, using the teamfight presence of that Terra. Radiance has the opportunity to snowball a little bit better, I think. Cupid is one of those gods that can all of a sudden take over a laning phase if he gets a lead. Big Man Tings can roam and make plays a little bit better than that of Merlin in the early game because the Poseidon clear is better and his ultimate is really relevant, whereas Merlin's really isn't at this point in the game. So I think that Radiance are probably the ones that are a little bit happier to take early scraps.
Panatom has his ultimate, showing some presence here in the right lane. There's the Divine Judgment onto Aurora, but this wall is really making it hard for him to make his way in, and that's from Rongyu. It never comes down. Panatom does not commit. That's the ultimate on cooldown. Radiance don't use really a whole lot at all. They're still perfectly chilling over there on the left-hand side.
Aurora wasn't even level 5, so he couldn't have used his ultimate, but that ult from Cyclone just did such a good job of zoning Rongyu and Netrioid out of that fight that Panatom knew that he really couldn't be the aggressor.
Now Radiance are the aggressors. They've got Rongyu locked down for first blood. Aurora, at least for my money, the best Yamoja player out there, locking down Rongyu to get Radiance off to a good start.
It's just such a scary kill lane, man, because either one of these ultimates from Yamoja or Cupid will kill you outright, even as a support. And Rongyu's able to survive the first one, which is Fields of Love, and then the River's Rebuke is a little bit too much to handle. And look at the level lead that Aurora and Cyclone have over on this left-hand side. I mean, Aurora and Cyclone both level 6. Netrioid just hit level 5, and they lost their purple buff anyways. This left side of the map is a whole lot of pressure now for Radiance, and Panatom's already been over to try and do it once and hasn't been able to relieve that pressure at all. If anything, just gave more pressure over to Radiance because of it. This is scary now for Sanguine on this left side of the map, because I do think that when Radiance's duo lane gets ahead, they're one of the best in the league at pushing it.
Adapting, showing some presence over in right, but no blue buff up or an invade, and even a ward there on the right side, so Sanguine certainly know he's got presence over here. Instead, they start to head back towards these harvests, but Tings, Benji, they're all rotating on. They definitely want this fight. Adapting the one that gets in first with the Trickster Spirit now between the Tier 1 and Tier 2, but good return damage from Shinto. Almost gets the kill, but Adapting gets the beads at the very least on his way out. So Shinto way less safe now.
That's a pretty optimal trade there for Radiance. I mean, you use a whole bunch of ultimates, but you get a lot of value out of them. Beads on both Panatom and Shinto, gotten by Tings and Adapting respectively with their ultimates, and you still are able to force them out a little bit. Panatom tries to counter invade knowing how low Adapting is, but nothing is really up on that side of the map anyways, which is the perfect time to be the aggressor as a jungler, which is when you've got nothing else better to do. You don't have anything to really worry about. So that was just a good window found by Adapting.
And you talked earlier about how this duo lane for Radiance to go over to the left side of the map is behind now, or not for Radiance, but Sanguine is behind now. And we've been doing these long-form interviews with him. We talk a bit longer. In fact, that talking might have to wait. Benji using the ultimate in trade, but he's got a little bit of help coming with Adapting, and there's action in duo, so both side lanes in a little bit of trouble. There's the Divine Judgment for Panatom, but Benji stands tall. Might not have been correct, though, as he's trading out his life. Yark Core falls as well, though. Aurora in trouble in left, too. Maybe this duo lane for Sanguine could turn things around after all. He barely makes it out of there as both solo laners end up falling.
Looks like Aurora might have ended up tanking some tower shots just based on his positioning, which is not the best way to win your 2v2 fight, but still has a little bit of health to work with. He's baiting Netrioid pretty heavily right now.
That's exactly what's happening. Big Man Tings and Cyclone Spin are on the way, but you might have forgotten that it's a Heimdall, able to use that Bifrost to teleport, but wrong, you not afforded that same luxury. He gets caught up in the fields of love and ends up falling, adapting up onto the Palau. Cannot find Panatom. He'll drop right back down, and that's crucial. Remember, we already pointed out Panatom had his beast forced out earlier.
That would have been a kill for adapting for sure. No way that shield would have helped Panatom, because the stun, when you get pulled in from the Palau, would cancel that out. So that was a kill for adapting if he could find a chain, but max distance makes it a little bit more difficult, and the extra movement speed from Panatom's katana doesn't help him a whole lot either. But I think the big story still for Radiance, even though that the little engagement on the right could have gone slightly better, is that their left side continues to dominate this laning phase. And clearly Sanguine hitting level 5 for Rongyu especially is a really big deal, but to not get a kill out of that Terra ultimate and still get a kill for yourself for Radiance is a really big swing.
Panatom insistent over here in the solo lane. There is the Eagles rally coming out from Benji, but he's slowed down and stuck, but Panatom backs up. They must have gotten some information on this rotation coming from adapting and Big Man Tings. Benji narrowly surviving Panatom's dive underneath the tier 1.
And this is a great opportunity now for Tings, because he knows that he's level 12, the highest level in the game right now, has his ultimate ready to go, and is very, very strong in that trade potential. Even though he hasn't gone for a particularly traditional mid laner item on the Poseidon, Hecate has moved its way into the mid lane here for Poseidon. Remember, earlier this year, there was that Poseidon build that got pretty popular with the Toxic Blade third, and I was going to say, with this start, I feel like that's the way that Tings is going to go. You're obviously going to max Trident second with this build, so that makes a lot of sense to me. Haven't got a chance to try this one yet. It's an interesting idea. Historically, I have not liked auto attack Poseidon, because I feel like if you're able to barrel stuff people with Trident, you're killing them whether or not you've built to do it with Trident. But Hecate's real good, so that might be enough to make this build actually worth it in my mind.
And one of those items you almost always want if you're able to build it. Could be trouble for Panatom. Takes the top side pathing, though. He's able to make it out of there A-OK. But I think you're so right to identify that Radiant have identified that they should be playing around Tings. But these last couple of rotations he's made and not getting a whole lot out of it has hurt him a bit. Shinto has now managed to repass him in farm. Now it's Shinto's turn. Take a look over towards right. Nothing really there for him, so he's heading back towards mid too. It looks like both teams really want to get their mid laner involved in these fights if they can.
That kind of happens in games like this, where both side lanes are heavy in action, that the mid laners end up just getting really far ahead because the junglers are too busy to put them down or to take some of their farm on either side. So both mid laners get really far ahead, and it is a great way to break the game wide open, is to have your mid laner that has priority and a whole lot of damage, more than anyone else on the map, can get to these fights a little bit more quickly. And that's why this Toxic Blade build for Tings looks even better in a game like this, because that DPS loss from going a 0 power item third doesn't hurt you as much, because you just have the base levels to be really strong anyways.
Benji looking for the invade on the Chaos side of the map right now. Panatom, Yarkor, and Shinto all here, but Tings is on his way, but Adapting gets burned quickly, makes it up to the Palau, and even gets the chains onto Panatom, who uses the beads. Dazzling offensive immunes it, and Adapting able to narrowly avoid it again. Radiance are up on the tightrope this game, and they've been able to make it out of there. Adapting and Benji multiple times now narrowly avoiding death.
That's huge in games like this, where the gold lead is way bigger than you probably thought. It's nearly 4K already for Radiance in just 12 minutes. That is a massive lead. But because there's been so much fighting, and a lot of it has been close, as you just said, it doesn't feel like Radiance is really that far ahead. But you look at this left side of the map, 2 levels for both Aurora and Cyclone Spin. Those two have not left the tower line of Sanguine quite yet. And Panatom's trying to do a very popular strategy, which is when you know your duo lane is basically lost, you're not going to be able to get over there and be the difference maker potentially. Let's just try and get our other side of the map ahead. But Radiance, I think, has done the perfect response to that, which is knowing that Aurora and Cyclone are fine. Don't gank your already winning lane. They don't need your help. Let's just go make sure that our right side of the map is shored up, and we can be a little bit aggressive over there simultaneously. I just think Radiance have really done a good job of understanding this game from a zoomed out perspective, and they've put themselves in a very good position to win it.
They are, and I think they're going to have an excellent transition into the mid to late game as well when they start to be a bit more objective focused here, aggro. I mean, I know Merlin's objective DPS is pretty high, but I don't know if you're doing anything to stop Kraken confirm here in this game from Big Man Tings. So even if the objectives end up 50-50, I feel like you're leaning pretty heavily towards Radiance. They've got a ton of team fighting presence too, with the big ulti from Cyclone Spin and as well from Aurora and adapting. I mean, how do Sanguine, we know they're good in the late as Pyromancer gets pulled by Radiance, but how do Sanguine try and battle up against this comp in the mid to late?
I think you're right to highlight its difficulty for sure. I do think that Terra Ultimate and Ama Ult and the Ama Aura do a lot in order to help. I mean, those are some of the best ultimates and teamfight presence gods in the whole game. It's really going to be difficult, I think, for Panatom to be super effective. I mean, you look at what Sanguine has in the strengths department when it comes teamfight time. It really is that front line. But is that going to leave Panatom needing to peel? I think Sanguine likely is just going to try and hard dive Tings and Cyclone with this Nemesis ult. Can Aurora keep them alive? Can he wall some people off with that River's Rebuke? It's not like Radiance is without tools to try and combat that. But I do think that even though Sanguine is very far down right now, they have the tools to win a team fight even from this position if Ronku can find a massive ultimate and Panatom can pick his spot effectively.
It just really raises the execution threshold, I think. If before they could have gotten away with maybe one or two mistakes in a team fight, that is no longer the case. Now, when they're up against Radiance, it's going to have to be essentially perfect if they're going to be able to overcome the deficit they're staring at. Panatom, though, wants to get aggressive. They've spotted Tings. Aegis buys him a moment. Dazzling offensive, though, gets the kill, even with the Kraken views. But now, can they escape adapting here on the Dodgy? So far, the answer is no. It's 1-for-1 solo for mid lane. Benji using that Eagles rally to cut off Shinto's escape path, but none of those flames pointed back towards the enemy, but still big damage coming out here from this Terra ultimate, and Radiance have to fall back. Sanguine somehow able to come out of that with a 1-for-1.
And you're loving a 1-for-1 when the person you kill is the enemy mid laner who's huge. Look at the teamfight recap. It shows how much more experience Sanguine grabs from the exact same setup, and that's just because Tings is level 16, whereas Yarkor is level 14. So a good opportunity seized by Sanguine on Tings, getting a little bit caught out with lack of ward coverage by Radiance on that side of the map. Now Sanguine knows as well that Radiance is ward light on the right, especially bottom right. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them come back to that same angle.
This Gold Fury's already done those, Sanguine. If you had plans to get there and stop it, it's already too late. So that extends the lead out for Radiance up to 6K. Sanguine unable to find a kill in the middle lane either. Benji way too tanky at this point in the game. And speaking of Benji, I think this is a good time to assess this build path here from Magro. It's looking, I like where he's at here right now.
Yeah, I think it's the right idea for Bellona, because I think that part of the reason we haven't seen her in a long time is that her build identity got a little bit wacky, and no one was really sure the best way to build. It was a little bit too flexible for its own good. The Berserker Shield is an interesting choice. It gives him a lot more in-lane sustain. It gives him some dive potential, do a lot of damage onto backliners, but it does make you pretty squishy, and certainly in comparison to builds in previous seasons. But straight into the Shogun's Kasari, you kind of tripling down on this attack speed from the Ninja Tabai, the Berserkers, and now the Shoguns, and you're starting to round out the build a lot better. And it means that if you go for something like a Frostbound later on in this build, you're going to perma-slow them. You might not even need the Frostbound, because honestly the slow from Shield Bash is pretty strong, and then you can start to just auto them down with your quick Scourge autos or your quick Shield Bash autos. Either one are pretty good in that instance. So it's interesting. It seems like it's going to be difficult. It's a high execution build. Like, squeezing auto attacks as a warrior is very hard to find the right opportunities to do so. So it's going to be fun to watch, man. I think it's definitely a build to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I don't know about Netroid or Shintoid, or what about Netroid indeed? Good ultimate, though, allows him to reposition and gets max distance out of it. Despite all the pressure, this tier 1 tower was pretty healthy to this point. But Netroid can't defend it alone, and now the Kraken being used elsewhere on Wrong Yu, also being hit by the Palau. They definitely want this terror to fall, but Wrong Yu lives through all of it. All of these ultimates committed, and no one on Sanguine has fallen yet. But look at Radiance clumped up as for Netroid stepping in and getting the beads out from adapting. Not bad from Sanguine, considering how much defense they had to play just now.
Little bit of an odd decision by Radiance, I think, to all in the Terra. I get that you want to get her off the map because she is so good in those team fights, but to commit Palau and Kraken is just not going to work once we get into the later portions of the game. As long as Rongyu presses 4 in a team fight, he has done his job. That is basically it. If you press 4 and you shell somebody else, you've done it as a Terra. So I just don't think that that's a winning recipe for Radiance. They probably thought that that was the last time they'd be able to all-in Rongyu and kill him.
Right.
But
And it was
even
close.
only as level 12 with those tank boots and the ultimate from Terra, it's just too much that you have to choose to in order to get her.
You can tell already, though, it's been a victory with this dodgy anyway, because Wrong, you had to pick up the beads. Obviously, he's right. They saved his life just now. He definitely would have died without them. But it does go to show, I think, the strength of this Palau and this constant pressure Radiance are putting on Sanguine's CC immunity at this stage of the game. Sanguine are going to be down an extra team fighting relic. They essentially only have the upgraded shell.
I think that's a good point. I mean, they don't have something like a Frenzy in order to keep them going. They don't have an Ankh like Radiance has now in order to shut down some of that fight healing that both teams have. So it'll be noticeable, but I think it is a necessity because if adapting just gets to start every fight by blinking and Howl out full Rongyu, that's not going to work too well for you. So I think that it's still the right idea for Rongyu to get the beats.
Wow, it was the Frostbound for Benji. I feel like this builds right after my own heart, and Rongyu is again the target of aggression from Radiance. He's been hit here first, but good use of the dashes to reposition so far. The Palau did successfully go off, but Sanguine still standing tall, but the Eagles rally is the final nail in the coffin as Panatom is the one that ends up falling first for Sanguine, and Radiance have all 5 members here in mid. They are ready to force something down, but Netroid's response in left is to take this tower. He's got the Bifrost. He knows where Radiance are. This is the best value he can get right now.
Yeah, Netroid's job is to be not level 15 anymore because he's 3-4 levels down of Cyclone Spin. So the only way he can do that is by staying and pushing on that left-hand side. That he's not worth anything in the team fights anyways right now. He should be just farming.
That's why you get so much inherent value, I think, though, out of starting fights when you're ahead, because you force your opponents to make these really tough decisions about, do I farm when I absolutely need to farm, or do I try and be there in the team fight so my team's not constantly in 4v5s? But I think Netroid responding to it properly by just farming up. It's still a 4v5 basically, even if he is there, because he's so irrelevant right now. He needs to get caught up so he can actually help out later on.
Agreed. It's the only call that he can make. This is an interesting call by Radiance, though, because they did not get a clean reset after that last team fight, even though they knew Oni Fury was about to spawn. I think it took them a little bit too long to get back and buy. In fact, I don't know that Tings has backed at all. He's been sitting on ring 2 for a little bit, so this is a little bit of an awkward team fight now for Radiance.
A little bit under a 6,000 gold lead is what separates them here. Certainly closer to 5k than the other way around, as Radiance can't really commit to pulling this Oni Fury. Sanguine are all nearby. No beads for Panatom, though, should cause some hesitation if you're Sanguine wanting to step into this fight. Oni Fury now down well below half. It's leashed again. Benji has recognized the Arcoris here. Look at the Frostbound sticking him around, but Dazzling Offensive does at least lock down a roar as Panatom tries to avoid the aggression and right, but there's too many of them. The Eagles rally too good, and Panatom without beads is just food at this point. Radiance get the 1-for-0, push Sanguine out, and they're not even going to do the Fury. This is all to open up for them to rotate over towards right.
Well, Sanguine was the one who actually snuck away that Fury while Panatom was getting engaged on, but Radiance looking for the tier 1.
Maybe they'll just settle for this one instead. Knock down that tier 1 tower. Kraken comes out to knock up Yark Core, and that's big value, but there's the Earth and Fury coming out for Rongyu. Maybe this is a chance for Sanguine to re-engage, but they can't afford to overstep here. They're down a member in Panatom, and Radiance, without getting the Fury, really has not gotten that much value just yet. You don't want to overstep here, as Rongyu does get the walls onto adapting. There's just no follow-up.
No, nothing in the tank really for Sanguine to be there with, and I think that this has just got to be a reset now for Radiance. Even Shinto really needs to. I mean, he's got 3k gold in hand. I would love to see Shinto just pick up a Hide of the Nemean Lion right now, because it removes Daji as a threat from you as a carry, because Daji's entire threat is all about blinking in auto one auto, because it one-shots you, and it's nearly unreactable if she's not using her 3. If you are over a wall and you can pull that combo off as Daji, that is at least 80% of their that carry's HP, and they are going to panic Aegis, and then they're just dead to whatever you've got after that. Outright damage will kill them even if it doesn't pull. Your 2 is fantastic chase potential. You've got your 3 to lock on. There's a million different ways to get that kill easily. But Nemean just prevents that entirely. It shuts down that whole combo, and I'm shocked that Shinto hasn't bought it yet, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe he feels like adapting hasn't been going for him yet, but it only takes once to get insta-killed by a Daji as a carry late game to lose your team the game. I'm very surprised that we don't see it here for Shinto up against the Daji.
He picks up the Staff of Mirrodin instead. And, you know, it's so interesting. I wonder if part of his calculation is that Netroid is so far behind, and Shinto feels like he's going to have to carry a big part of this damage burden and doesn't want to give up an item. But
sure,
if you die instantly to the Daji, you don't do any damage, right, in the team fight either. So it's a difficult, I think, sort of thread to pull in terms of which direction gives him more value. And maybe he's just kind of hoping he's able to survive the Daji either way.
Right, I think that's a very good point for sure, knowing that Netroid is really far behind, but on the other side of that coin, it makes Adapting's choice really easy, where if he can just all-in and commit and kill you, it doesn't matter what Netroid's going to do.
Kraken coming onto Rongyu on the left-hand side. Benji takes quite a bit of damage from Shinto, but Shinto's low as well, so decent poke put in both directions, but both teams able to hold on to relevant relics. It is, though, Rongyu's ultimate on cooldown. That might be the most important cooldown Sanguine have right now. It's the only thing that gives him a shot in these team fights.
It's huge for that to be traded out for Kraken, though. You see how little damage that Kraken does. This Big Man Tings build does not make those Krakens threatening at all. And again, if he gets in a melee range, is he really even out trading Shinto that hard? I mean, it's Merlin up close. That's kind of where he wants you most of the time. We just, in my mind, we have not seen the value out of this auto attack build quite yet. It is really good on objectives in comparison to the normal Poseidon build. Just getting a whole bunch of attack speed. Trident is nuts DPS.
Whoa, Sanguine are the ones pulling the trigger. Well, they do have Cyclone Spin low in the backline, but Yark Core has been caught by the Fields of Love, and the Riptide pulls him back as well. Now it's the Daji over the wall, and Yark Core has absolutely nowhere to go. Cyclone Spin gets the kill, and Sanguine curiously have overstepped. Now Radiance are the one who could step on the gas. It's Benji locking down Rongyu on the right side of the fight. There are the beads out from him just to get away from all the slows, and Radiance have to feel confident now in the 5v4.
Benji's looked awfully good on this pick, hasn't he? I mean, he's been really impactful in every single team fight. Right there gets beads because Rongyu knows without dash, he's just dead. Speaking of which, Fire Giant's already dead. Cyclone and crew take that one down with ease.
They absolutely burn it. This is a problem now for Sanguine. And Aggro, what do you make of starting that fight the way that Sanguine do? They send Yark Core in aggressively for Cyclone Spin?
I don't know, to be honest with you, because that one caught me off guard as well. I don't know what Sanguine saw that made them feel like they were really favored in that fight. From the top-down perspective, it was very clear that they weren't, but maybe without any sort of war coverage, Sanguine thought that there weren't that many people there from Radiance and that they didn't know that everyone was right around the corner. I thought they'd seen them, but maybe they hadn't. I mean, from our angle, it gets difficult sometimes to defend decisions like that, but
yeah,
clearly Sanguine was working with different information than we were, because if they had our information, I do not think they would have engaged.
No, I don't think so either. And Yarkor, really the entirety of Sanguine, pay the price for that aggression. It's obviously the kill for Radiance onto Yarkor, but they also now have the Fire Giant. Certainly not in hand yet, but I think plenty strong. They'll have the Primal, so that next time they're around to the FG, it'll be even easier for them, as if it wasn't easy enough last time around. And look at this, there's still the Tier 1 and Tier 2 in the long lane, the Tier 2 in mid, so Radiance's lead is about to get a whole lot bigger before they even start this siege, you know, if they plan to reset and spend around it.
I do think this game is valuable for Sanguine, and really for the rest of the league as well, because it just serves as a reminder that there are certain teams that you cannot give free laning phases to. I think Radiance is on top of that, alongside Ghost. I think those two duo lanes punish bad laning phases better than any other team.
Adapting is under a little bit of pressure. Felt he had to use the Purification beads there to get away, but you wouldn't be able to tell he was in a fight if you didn't know the beads were on cooldown. That is the sustain from Yamoja, I have to imagine. That's got him all the way topped back up on the back of that little skirmish. They did reset a bit. I think Cyclone Spin went back and finished up this Wind Demon. They're fully 6-slighted. Benji sold his Warrior's Blessing for this Mantle. It's just still the Assassin's Blessing and Guardian's Blessing for Adapting and Aurora, respectively. But Radiance are very near full capacity at this point, man. They're ready to rock.
They have a lot of damage in the tank too, just because of this extra Fire Giant buff that they've got, but not a lot of towers left on the map. The Radiance did a very good job of pushing those out, so they could just group up and go for the Tier 2 in mid. Not a lot of time left on this Fire Giant right now, only about 1 minute and 20 seconds, so they don't have that many waves to try and get a Phoenix with.
And I know how good Sanguine are in the late game, but there's a certain amount of lead you can get where it kind of doesn't matter how good the other team is in the late game. And we're approaching it now, man. About 14,000 or so in favor of Radiance. They group up all 5 in left to start up this siege. They still don't have a minion wave here with them, but clearly this is where they want to get aggressive.
Benji can tank this pretty effectively with the extra sustain between not only Aurora, but don't forget Cyclone as well.
That's 2 big ultimates used. The Fields of Love comes out as Shinto continues to put out some damage. They also use the River's Rebuke, but Aurora ends up low. Divine Judgment committed from Panatom, but they get next to nothing there as Aurora is able to stay alive. And now the sustain you just mentioned between Cyclone Spin and Aurora means they can re-aggress in just a moment.
But only 25 seconds left on this Fire Giant buff. This is the last wave coming that Radiance has with the buff.
It's Adapting. He goes in first, right up onto the Powwow in response, way up near the front. Yarkor is low, but Adapting not able to get anyone pulled in. Shinto and the boys able to find a pretty good kill. Sanguine are holding on right now. In fact, Netroid using beads so he can keep being aggressive. They think that this is their fight, but Benji wants to tell him he's wrong. Good ultimate on reaction from Netroid gets him away from that Eagles rally, and Sanguine have to regroup around their defense one more time as Shinto looks to get a bit aggressive.
Really good damage out from Sanguine and a good defense that really just comes down to the fact that Radiance don't have great poke potential, it feels like, with this build, or with this composition. And even with that little bit of sustain from Rongyu, felt like it was keeping Sanguine healthy enough through that team fight to really be able to stand there for a longer period of time. Now, if that was a full Fire Giant siege where Radiance is knocking on the door as soon as they reset after getting fire, that maybe goes differently. But because it was really it had to be the first 2 waves that worked for Radiance, they knew they were on a clock, and Sanguine really played it nice and patiently to make sure that they were going to be A-okay.
And I was bringing this up earlier, right? We have these long-form interviews we're doing now, the team check-ins, and I had the one with Sanguine, and I asked them, was your favorite and least favorite people to lane against, and obviously they had a little bit of fun talking about Awesome Jake and how he can be tough to lane up against with his crazy strategies, but they love laning up against Ghost duo lane. They love being up against the very best duo, and I guess that's who they think it is, PBM and Panda Cat. But I think here today we're seeing that Aurora and Cyclone's been certainly giving them a run for their money, but I think it means Rongyu and Netroid are not discouraged. They like when they're up against the very best of the best like this.
Yeah, I think they are after the fact. I don't know about in-game when Netroid's down
in
4
this
levels
exact
underneath
moment.
the tower. You know, I don't think he's feeling particularly grateful at that moment necessarily, but it is definitely a good point to highlight that they are still of that mindset that they still have a lot to learn. Because remember, these guys are SPL rookies. It's insane to think about. The season has felt long because of everything that's going on in the world, but just a couple months ago, we weren't sure if these guys were going to be able to compete at this level, and now they lose their first set earlier this week, and we go, what happened? And now they're down in game 1 of this set, and we go, really? Another game where Sanguine doesn't look particularly good? It's crazy how quickly the public perception and the expectations for teams change very, very rapidly in the SPL.
And we got to make sure we're giving them their credit. They didn't lose to some randoms. I mean, that's Space Station and Radiance they're facing this week.
Yep.
So a really tough schedule. But like you said, our expectations of Sanguine are that they're one of the top teams, and you have to be able to compete up against the other top teams if you want that title. Radiance, even with Shinto nearby, able to secure the Theory just now, and really not much chance Shinto could steal that on his own. But Radiance playing it a bit patiently now they made to this point in the late game. Was that one defense from Sanguine enough to where Radiance now should have to start to show them a lot more respect?
Not really. I think that it was just because the Fire Giant was so low. At this point, there wasn't a whole lot for Radiance to group up for because they'd already taken every tower. So grouping up for the Oni Fury, making sure that Sanguine doesn't do fire in the meantime by setting the majority of your forces onto that right-hand side. And now you set yourselves up for a really good firefight.
Good news is Sanguine's almost 6 slotted as we get into the next Fire Giant dance. A bit low in the back was Aurora, I think. Hard to tell now as he's already starting to get some healing out there and everyone's looking better. But as I said, 6 slotted, but look at some of these items. The Rage for Netroid not stacked at this point. It's not exactly even in terms of value as the Fields of Love almost locks down Wrong-U, so they have to commit the River's Rebuke as well. But Cyclone's been really falling low to this pressure from Yarkor. Kraken is there to provide him some peel. He can't live up against all 3. That was Panatom that ends up falling, trying to get aggressive way at the front of the fight. Meanwhile, Wrong-U has Big Man Tings there, and there's that basic attack focus build doing some damage as Cyclone Spin gets the double. Adapting has caught up to Shinto with Yarkor falling as well for a double for Adapting. That might just be the game. I don't think Netroid can keep all 5 out on his own.
No, I don't think so. He's not had the best game so far, just out of the laning phase. But that was the first fight where I felt like Tings really brought a whole lot of damage to the forefront. Had a great Kraken on a Panatom, a fantastic Whirlpool on 2 after the fact, and Cyclone really stood tall alongside Tings. That was great backline peeling for one another in that fight.
Diving into the fountain for the full Dia side here, Aggro, as Radiance come out on top here in Game 1 in this battle of the Titans between Radiance and Sanguine. I think this is huge for Radiance because you said this in your interview you had with Biggie. They did not have the best Phase 1, right? They end up in 5th place. They had all that talent, and it felt like the results weren't matching up. But when you look at their playoffs performance and how they've looked in Phase 2, Aggro, I think they might have finally started to really click.
Without a doubt, man, they're undefeated so far here in Phase 2. They had that great playoff run. I think Radiance is really clicking right now, and we knew it was only a matter of time for this team. I mean, they just have way too much talent to really end up anywhere but near the top of the standings. I'm just a little bit more worried about Sanguine. They seem a little bit off still, and as Biggie said, maybe it's just trying to get back into the swing of things after a long break. I think that we still haven't seen Sanguine play to the level that we saw from them in Phase 1.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to win a lot of games if Netroid and Wrong-U struggle like that in the laning phase. Hopefully, something can look better for them here in Game 2. I'll get it down to the desk to see what they think.
Thank you, Finch. Thank you, Aggro. Radiance come into this set, as they mentioned, without having dropped a single game. And that one continues here in game number 1. Started early for Radiance and didn't really stop. A little pushback from Sanguine early on. But really not enough Mifflin to turn this one around. What did you see here that gave Radiance the big edge?
Well, duo lane pressure getting given up almost from the rip by Sanguine is going to be hugely impactful for Radiance almost always. Almost any team is going to be able to exploit the fact that you have 0 pressure in your long lane. But it really, this match kind of can be broken down as if a boa constrictor latched around the map, that boa constrictor being Radiance, and they never let go once they had that grip. It was just clean play. Sanguine, again, are just looking a little bit disjointed, and they weren't playing around the strengths of their team. Their carries were almost never involved, both mid and ADC going 0-0-0 for the first 30 minutes. Sanguine just seemed like they're kind of out of their own pace.
I agree. And the woes kind of continue, and our concerns around that mindset absolutely continues here. I know, Mifflin, you're a big Bellona fan, and I assume you really like what Benji brought to the table here and certainly helped get Radiance the win.
Yeah, I got to give some shouts to Benji. I thought this pick would have been a little bit questionable, but just how the meta is evolving and how Benji piloted this god, he was creating almost an infinite amount of space. He was almost unignorable because of the Frostbound Hammer, just locked down anyone standing in front of him. His damage output was immense. The space he created was immense. He really only died once, and even then he got a huge dub for his team when he did so. And this pick might just be really strong in this current meta.
You know, and we were actually talking about this to kind of flip the script and look at the other side. You know, Shinto obviously did a great amount of damage there, closing in, or is firm in that second in the game slot. It was, what, 29 minutes in? It was the left side Phoenix Siege for Radiance, and the carries were still, what, 0-0-0 for Sanguine? I mean, totally unimpactful on the game up to that point. Granted, not much that the rest of the team had done either, but the carries for Sanguine just were not able to get involved here in this one. Is that something you think is born out of the draft? I mean, we were wondering how some of these picks would look. Is that a draft issue, or does that seem more play style issue there after what we saw in Game 1?
I think it is more play style. Even though the draft is strong, I think Sanguine had a perfectly fine draft. They just didn't play it around it very well. And I think a lot of that is just due to the fact that in the early games, certain players were getting picked out repeatedly. It's very hard for these carries to come into these engagements from behind or from even and do something when the rest of your team is kind of crumbling around you. You're going to get a lot of damage on Merlin no matter what, especially when you're losing. It's very easy to throw out some abilities on Phoenix Siege defense or tower defense, and I think that's a lot of where Shinto got involved. Now, I don't think there was a point in that game where Sanguine really could get proactive because they just let it slip away from them so quickly.
Yep. Another fantastic game from Radiance, and the gas is not being let off at all. I think big mistake giving Yamoja over to Aurora as well, who had a fantastic game there in game number 1. Maybe game number 2, Sanguine in this first pick slot feeling slightly different. It was the Hercules that really opened up, or the Hercules ban rather, that kind of opened up some of the different bit of flexibility there for Radiance, and kind of the reverse now as Sanguine will take Yamoja off the table.
It's a smart ban. I mean, if Aurora's going to be able to control the game like he did last time, you might as well make sure he doesn't do it. But this might open them up to either some incredibly strong meta picks if you don't decide to ban out some of the Magical Hunters, or Cupid even now, we have to consider him as strong and because he's performing incredibly well on every single team that we've seen pick him. Or you might just leave Radiance having Hercules again. I mean, Aurora being this lightning rod, having so much pressure in every single game, means that if you really want to target ban him out, it's going to take more than just the Yamoja.
But through 4 bans here, haven't quite started to target him all that much. Olrun and Freya both taken away, no surprises there. Persephone saw a lot of play in week 1. Most teams have not let her through since then. So that's a double ban now on Aurora. That was kind of the next thought in my mind, where you ban out the Yamoja, fine. Do you commit another ban to Aurora to take away that Hercules? And the answer is yes by Sanguine. Aurora just carries that much weight on those 2 gods that now are forcing him onto something else, which has seen some, albeit mitigated, success in phase number 1. Cthulhu, the final roundabout ban here. So if you're Sanguine, you've taken away a lot from Aurora. The Freya, of course, off the top there, presumably from Cyclone Spin. And Myth, Amaterasu is your answer for your first pick.
Taking up Ama, fantastic flex pick. You could throw it into support if you wanted to. It's more than likely going to go into solo. It might even look pretty decent in the jungle, despite some recent Golden Blade nerfs. I like the pick overall, but you know that Radiance might be looking towards exactly that, the Nemesis. Adapting, when not able to get Nem, will fall back to Daji, but if you know Nem is going to be available, Adapting is very much willing to take it, and then they could even look towards the next best picks. We've seen that Radiance has been very willing to play Chronos in the past as a magical hunter, so they might be willing to just wait a little bit on their hunter pick, or they might look towards the Ull or something along those lines. Instead, again, Cupid, bite my own tongue a little bit. Both teams got a pretty strong draft right here. It's how well they're able to build a squad around it. I want Sanguine to take some more aggressive early game picks. If they're going to get blown out early, they have to match that fire. We've already seen that they're not able to play into a 6,000-7,000 gold deficit come mid-game.
That's true. That was largely missing from game number 1. Amaterasu, maybe not what was the issue there. I think Yarkor had a fantastic game. Jingwei, so, you think to phase 1 Sanguine, Jingwei is really what comes to mind if you're talking about Nitrioid and his god pool. Obviously, there have been some changes in the meta, but a Jingwei Ganesh lane, I mean, that's That's pretty sanguine of Sanguine, I think, to draft here. I don't know if it's this early pressure maybe we were looking for, but if you're talking about comfort picks in its truest form, I think Sanguine have got that.
And it's still a bit of kind of sneaky fight potential, I'd say, from Sanguine to the duo lane. Find the knockup from Ganesh, followed up with a knockup from Jingwei. It's going to be really good damage and lockdown. The Dharmic Pillar is going to have a very easy time locking down the Cupid. He doesn't have a standard leap, so even if he does have to commit his dash to jumping through, he's going to lose a lot of health and likely get slowed down enough for Jingwei to catch up. But that said, I still want to see more pressure. If Sanguine are going to take these safer picks, these more mid-game to late-game centric picks, even out of the jungle, I'd expect to see something like a Susano or a Thor, just anything that's going to get them to that phase of the game without giving so much up to Radiance in the early.
Well, I think Radiance agree with you there. They're going to take the Robin off the table. Great at kind of smoothing the edges between that early to the mid-game there. A third ban now committed towards Aurora. Khepri not allowed to be played. The Naja will follow, so obviously Radiance have a more jungle-centric mindset. Sanguine going a little bit more support-focused with their ban phase. So Aurora now is going to have to move to his fourth pick, I suppose, with the Khepri being taken away. I do want to talk a little bit about the Poseidon, though, Mifflin. More auto-attack-centric build there in game number 1. In our conversations about magical ADCs over the next few weeks, do you think Poseidon has to be in our mouths?
Look, I like the mobility that build affords you. It allows you to reposition around these team fights incredibly well. It makes 1v1s almost impossible against Poseidon. But that build has so much variance in it. If you fall behind in the early game, you're sacrificing so much early penetration, so much power, that you're really not going to be able to deal damage. Even last match, when they were largely ahead for the majority of the game, we saw that Poseidon's Kraken really wasn't dealing a ton of damage. He wasn't really able to find those auto attacks in impactful ways. I think that build is very strong, but it really is contingent on winning out in the early and then using it to attack objectives, go for towers, go for Gold Fury, go for Fire Giant. And I think that's really where it shines, because not only are you going to be one of the best objective shredders in the game, but you still have a pretty strong confirmation inside of that ultimate.
The Kraken, fantastic at not only executing kills, but the objectives as well. It's a Mercury and a Hebo to round out the draft here for Sanguine. So we've already talked a bit about their top 3. Mercury, of course, a little bit better scaling into that late game, can absolutely do some damage early, but it's that late game mark where he's one-shotting your backline where you really have to be concerned. Sanguine, we wondered if maybe they needed some more early game presence. Do you think they've drafted something that can compete a little bit better with what Radiance have brought to the table?
It's going to be hard, man. I mean, I said I want them to take more early game, and then they take 2 more late game hyper carries who are going to be completely reliant on itemization. 3 of their gods are very auto attack focused: Mercury, Jingwei, and Amaterasu. We've already seen what Bellona was able to do into that. I mean, the Scourge is going to get insane value. Mercury's going to look for the Sonic Boom to get in. Well, good luck finishing off that kill. You can't auto attack anymore, and if you're trying to auto attack Bellona, good luck working through all those block stacks. It's going to be hard for Sanguine. I'm not sure how they're going to be able to get through the early game. A lot of it is really going to be contingent on Amaterasu. If we see her head over to the Soul lane, you're likely going to be looking to put her in the lead so she can rotate out and make these huge impact plays around Gold 3 around the 15-minute mark. But even then, man, Sanguine giving up the majority of their lanes just due to pressure from Radiance's draft.
And we've seen this big influx of items that are a lot of people are being more willing to take these anti-auto attack items. So we'll see. Can Sanguine bounce back here in game 2, or do Radiance find themselves in a 2-0 position? We'll have to go down to your casters to find out.
I don't know, Dawson. After game number 1, Radiance are looking pretty strong to me, especially if Benji's allowed to lock in this Bellona. It was dominant back in game 1. I see no reason why it wouldn't succeed here. What about for you, Aggro? What's your biggest takeaway that you're seeing with these draft picks they've gotten here so far?
That Sanguine looked in the face of another Cupid lane and at least didn't have to deal with Emoji this time, but still picked Jingwei right away. That's very surprising. I mean, look, Netrui didn't die at all in that game until it ended, until he is dead in the fountain. That was his first death of the game, but that doesn't mean that side of the map wasn't the reason for Radiance's massive lead. And I just don't think that Sanguine has done enough in the drafting phase to remedy that. Now, they can do a lot when it comes to playstyle. They can have that first gank from Panatom be a little bit more effective. He's on the Mercury now, which I think is a fantastic pick up against Cupid because you can gank him down the lane. You don't have to worry about his ward coverage at all. And then whenever he drops the Fields of Love, all you do is press 2 and you don't have to worry about it because you get slow immunity. So I think that this is a good pick for Sanguine, but I need to see how they're going to actually work with it once it comes to the laning phase.
And I think that's going to be pretty important how they line up against the Cupid, as Rongu takes a lot of poke here early. I mean, they've got some tools that can hopefully help them get out of it, right? I mean, with Yar Core, hopefully if he has the ultimate, or some of these other picks that they have. Because Cyclone Spin was doing a great job last game. Whenever he recognized someone was a little bit out of position from the rest of the team, he would use that ultimate to really help isolate them and pick them off. There weren't a ton of kills last game, but a lot of them came on the battlefields alone.
And they were really, really big, just in terms of control on the team fight. And there was a lot of control on Radiance's side that is not there this time. I mean, just the geometry of the River's Rebuke was huge. That won't factor in this game. The CC from adapting won't factor in this game nearly as hard.
Right.
So now you're going to see more teamfight relics, I'm sure, out of Sanguine, though I say that and look down and Rongu has beads. So maybe not. They're going to be lacking in that department potentially again, just because of the threat of Aurora's ultimate this time more than anything else.
The Stygian Torment can be strong for pulling in if you don't have the beads, even though it can be a little bit readable at times. But I think supports are the ones that have to worry about that kind of thing more than everyone else. But look at Cyclone Spin and Aurora trying to get aggressive here on the left-hand side yet again. And I don't see any reason why not to. I mean, last game, Sanguine kind of let them know that Radiance can establish this pressure as Netroid bounces up a couple of times, just eats the damage there from Aurora. They got to make sure they're careful over here. They cannot afford to get bullied out again.
But the exact same thing is happening that happened last game. They're losing lane control. They lose this Alpha Harpy right away. This time it looks like purple buff is going to be a little bit difficult for Radiant to steal away on the first respawn. But that's pretty typical to not go for this purple respawn because you are so vulnerable to a jungler gank and you don't have any pressure that could end up helping you. But the next purple, I would not be surprised to see Radiance ready to go.
And think about how Rongu likes to play aggro. He really is involved across the map, normally. But what did we see from him last game? He was kind of relegated to sticking with Netroid. Part of the reason Netroid was able to maintain the 0-0-0 until the end of the game is because Rongu spent a lot of time over there with him in the long lane when they really started falling behind. So it's not just they're behind and that Radiance get to rotate out with a lead, but it's completely changing the way that Sanguine like to play because they don't get a lot of that extra presence.
It's a good point. I mean, when I think of the lane-dominant duo lanes, like I said, I think of Radiance and I think of Ghost. But Mike likes to rotate a little bit more than I think Aurora does. Aurora is very, very happy to sit on your tower line with Cyclone Spin and farm every wave at tower line and then get ready to invade your buff off of that. The teams have a very different play style, even if I think the way that they play the lane is a little bit more similar than most. So I think that idea, it makes a lot of sense for Radiance, and it facilitates their game plan a whole lot better than something like Aurora moving around the map a whole lot, because Radiance is a team that wants to take it late for the most part, but they want to take it late with a massive advantage in hand, like they did.
The best way, yeah. Unlike Sanguine, who won an honorable late game sort of battle, it feels like. But that's not how Radiance are going to be playing it, man. They're going to take every advantage they can find here and try and push you back. Cyclone Spin, yet again, hitting that level 5 first. And remember, that's what made it so hard for Panatom to gank, even on a god with way more early game gank potential. Mercury's Sonic Boom can be strong, but it's just that without some itemization, his gank presence in general can sometimes be a little flat. I don't know if we'll even see him come over to the left-hand side particularly early.
Probably not. I mean, Mercury really is a really good setup god early. I think that's something that really is overlooked with his kit, is that he plays setup really well, and then later in the game becomes the guy who's doing it all himself, doesn't need any help, and that's one of his main strengths as a character, is that he is valuable at all points in the game. It's just value in different ways. But does Jing Wei have the damage off of Panatom's setup? I mean, you don't have that big damage coming out of that duo lane early on. If Rongu's there, that'll be enough, because Dharmic Pillars is really strong, but you really need 3 people now in order to kill one Cupid with any sort of guaranteed effectiveness, which is probably not ideal.
No, it's going to be tough for Sanguine to make that happen on the left-hand side. I think that's why we've seen more of this from Anatom. Hanging out near mid and solo, trying to secure the farm. Not going to happen there, as Adapting able to find the slice and dice. But for the most part, he has been leaning... I don't even know if mid is quite fair to say. He's been leaning over here, hanging out towards Yar core, trying to see if they can make anything happen a lot of the times. But Radiance have been patient about it. It's just like you mentioned in Game 1. Adapting will show up over there if need be, or Benji will just play safe. Sanguine are having a hard time figuring out where to go here in this early game.
But in comparison to what we saw in Game 1, this is much better. Remember, at this point in Game number 1, Rongyu and Netroid were level 4, whereas Aurora and Cyclone were level 6, and standing on their purple buff every single respawn. Now that that plan has not been as effective, they don't feel like they can just continually die.
Not able to find the actual stun or get him back into the Dharmic Pillars. Way out of sync, I feel like, on that gank attempt. Aurora is able to get the stun onto Panatom, but the most impressive thing that happened there is that he managed to just walk away scot-free. 2 ultimates committed, and Sanguine get not a whole lot.
Certainly not the clean and, you know, in control Sanguine that we saw in phase number 1. Those sorts of miscommunications and mechanical misplays really just weren't present earlier on, and right there it's a little bit of communication, it's a little bit of execution, probably a little bit more than a little bit of execution, because the ultimate being short for Panatom there, and then the communication with Rongyu on where they wanted that Dharmic Pillars. If they put him up against the wall from that position and Rongyu's a little bit closer, then I think that works out better.
But instead, they get almost no value. Panato does show up in right again to make sure the blue buff gets defended. And it looks like both Rongyu and Aurora doing a little bit more rotating this time. Netroid and Cyclone spin relatively on their own on the left-hand side of the map. And I suppose if that's going to be the call, how do you like that matchup? I mean, I feel like Jingwei could get potentially punished by that Fields of Love, but as long as she has Airstrike, should always be safe.
Yeah, that's the thing with Jingwei, man. You can punish her a little bit, but that's it. It's you know, we force the ultimate and then she's out because it just covers so much ground. This is a matchup where I think we'll see Cyclone start to rotate mid a little bit more early on. I mean, I think that we'll try and see some more small groupings from Radiance, because I think their 3v3 fight is a lot better than it was last time in the early game, because Nemesis, I think, has a lot more value than something like Dodgy early on. But it does make this laning phase a little bit less dominant for Cyclone.
Adapting is hanging out, but I'd be very surprised if Netroid doesn't know at this point. I think Adapting stepped out a little bit, so Netroid should have an idea. Not going to pull the trigger either way, though. Adapting backing off, and this is much slower pace throughout this early game, you're right. And I wonder how much of this is really just that there's no Yamoja this time, right? I mean, remember how it was setting up for the 2v2s even without any ganks, or when Panatom showed up, they stuffed the gank in a 2v3, really where the numbers favored Sanguine. I mean, I think just as much taking away the Yamoja has been valuable here, as this time Panatom a bit more on the mark, but the Kraken is there waiting for him, and Panatom, thanking his lucky stars, he gets to make it out of there.
I just don't know in what world that play goes perfectly for Sanguine. I mean, where do they one-shot someone with the composition and don't lose someone in return? Because Shinto, if he's going to follow up on that ultimate with a crushing wave, he's in tower. So that's just a low percentage engagement. I know Adapting doesn't have any beads, but that's just not enough damage to actually one-shot.
Well, there's the ultimate trade here in duo, but Netroid's hitting more autos, dashing it aggressively as Cyclone Spin has nowhere to go. First blood for Sanguine as Netroid finds the 1v1, and there's really nothing here for Adapting once he makes his way over here. Cyclone Spin, I don't know if maybe the dash was down, he'd already used it there at that point, but Netroid certainly coming out on top.
Looks like he dashed in order to get in range, and Netroid just so comfortable on Jingwei. He knows that
It's true.
You can dash in, man. I've got airstrike, and that's going to take me out of your damage and return some damage onto you. Perfect.
Rolled very low. Sanguine narrowly able to secure it. That slice and dice looked like it was going to be enough to steal it away at the last minute. Divine Judgment also used there by adapting, but this is huge for Sanguine, man. As we get the replay, yeah, you can clearly see the dash trail there from Cyclone Spin, so that was used to get in for that ultimate. And then once they were into close range and Netroid hit a few more autos, he knew he had the lead.
And that's just a super advantageous position for Jingwei because she gets a power buff from that dash after the knockup and a movement speed buff. Like, it's just impossible to win that trade.
Benji is the target of this gank, but he has beads as well. I don't know if Panatom was ready for that because the hammer hitting both of them sets up for the crush on the Panatom. Benji trying to find somewhere to go. The gift bestowed over to Yarkor, I believe, courtesy of the Darvik Pillars there. But either way, it ends up being a 1-for-1, but you hate to trade your late-game Mercury out this early.
Just not been able to be super effective so far for Panatom. And even though he gets the assist there, taking the death, I think just gives Benji some good confidence on this pick, and it continues to look pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, it's been solid so far for this Bellona. The pick gets a lot worse, I think, into what Sanguine has, because again, that same style of build won't be nearly as effective with the slow immunity available to Sanguine in this game, but Benji switching it up.
And Shinto is in the ground. Big Man Tings with the ultimate. Maybe some help from Cyclone Spin, who was nearby. He didn't get the assist, so I imagine that had to be all Big Man Tings finding that kill there onto Shinto. Even with Sanguine getting the solo kill over in left and Panatom trying to be active, really it still feels like they're not quite in sync here to me, Aggro.
No, I agree. They're just a little bit off in comparison to what we've seen from them in the past. As again, Panatom shows up and gets kicked out by Benji. I mean, this is we're talking no junglers allowed on this right side of the map if Benji has his say.
I like that Benji took the beads there early on. I mean, really, he was pretty close to not getting value, I think, from the early beads. There's the Sonic Boom. Benji gets locked down, and finally, the cleanup kill. We just got to commit 3 ultimates, and we could put Benji down, but it will eventually go their way. 3rd time's the charm.
Yeah, Benji would have jumped that Sonic Boom from Panatom and stunned him. I would have lost it. It would have no chance that any mental could ever be saved from a play like that. So Sanguine showing a little bit of stubbornness in a good way on that right-hand side by refusing to let Benji get away with the laning phase once again. And he's, as I highlighted, he's already kind of switching up the build. Last game he went Shoguns in this 3rd slot. This game he's working towards a Stone of Gaia, which is fantastic against Sanguine's composition because they have 4 knockups that will proc that Stone of Gaia passive. There is some anti-heal already in what Shinto has on the Divine Ruin, so it's not going to be completely true healing, but it's still an awful lot of regen, and Bellona's going to love that.
That should be a great pickup into this composition from Sanguine in particular here if he ends up going into that Stone of Gaia. And sort of as you were talking about, man, I mean, this has been some struggles here for Sanguine here so far. They're going to have to make sure they're able to get all these gears realigned. They were able to eventually get that kill over there up against Benji. But what Radiance is really showing us here, I think, is their versatility. They have been playing a lot of different picks than what I think we normally associate with them. If Aurora can show this Cerberus is another strong pick, that adds a lot of value to them. Benji showing that he's got this Bellona also here that can come out, and their teams have to think about that. They've got it's just hard to know what they're going to play as the Kraken catches out Panatom, narrowly getting out of there and avoiding the damage coming from Aurora. It's actually adapting wins up low. Yarkor able to close the distance and get the kill. But what about Aurora in mid? He takes a bunch of damage, and the Stygian Torment won't be enough. He gets flattened by the crushing wave.
A good idea by Radiance with Sanguine just there, and that's the Sanguine we're used to seeing. You know, they look like they're in a bad spot, and then they pick their targets correctly. Yarkor with a fantastic rotation out of solo lane in order to clean up adapting and get both relics from Benji simultaneously. That's huge.
There's the Sonic Boom. Cyclone Spin's dash now down. Uses the Field of Love at his feet and picks up a heart. But the rest of Sanguine are battling on the right side. Benji down low, able to make it out of there. But we cannot say the same for Cyclone Spin. Big damage starting to come out from Sanguine now. And that is another pick they've been able to grab. Starting to look a lot better here in Game 2.
all of a sudden it's Sanguine up 3K at 15 minutes. I mean, we were saying that a 4K lead at 12 in game number 1 was massive for Radiance. So this one, not quite to that level, but pretty darn close at this rate. You still have a level lead for Tings in mid, but everywhere else is starting to really fall behind on the map.
Oni Fury goes to Sanguine as well. And here's the thing about playing Mercury, man. Even if your early game isn't all there, and let's be honest, it has not been for Panatom so far, once you start getting some crit online, you start moving into the mid to late game, all can be forgotten because the margin of error really shrinks. Mercury's able to get away with a lot in the late game once he's swinging.
And he'll out-trade just about anybody as well, which makes him very, very difficult to deal with. Now, I think that Nemesis has the tools to maybe end up winning that 1v1 because that shield will cause such problems for Mercury. Either you commit the dash and then she uses beads and kills you for it, or you have to dash away once that Retribution shield pops up. But overall, I still like Panatom's positioning. He's level 16 already.
This could have been big brain for Radiance, but they get spotted out, and Netroid's the first one in. Sonic Boom is there for the follow-up, and Benji low, but Eagle's rally in place has bought him some time. Panatom narrowly able to make his way out of there as Yarkor has dove Big Man Tings beneath the Tier 1 tower. This is the Sanguine from Phase 1, where it looks like things are bad, but they're just on a different page from you further ahead in the book.
Man, Yarkor has just had a monster game as well. 5-0 for him.
Yeah,
he just continues to be a terror in these team fights. And Cyclone kind of doing what Netroid had to do last game. You're just so far behind, you're not really worth rotating into the fight anyways. Might as well get what I can on the left.
Fire Giant low, Aurora's nearby, the only one with steal potential, but Crushing Wave takes away any of that potential if it ever existed in Aurora. His life certainly should be forfeit here, kind of a question of how much time can he eat away from Sanguine, because there is no chance for him to survive in this spot. But this is where I feel like Sanguine look like they're at their best. Now they've got Fire Giant as we move into the mid game. Now they've got about a 5k gold lead or so in their favor, and they can really start to spread these fights out. Yarkor, Panatom, Shinto, and Netroid are all very relevant threats on their own.
Yeah, I think that this is a very difficult position for Radiance to come back from, because so many of their picks are really well neutralized by Sanguines with these slow immunities. I mean, Poseidon, Cupid, Nemesis, Bellona, who was going Frostbound, and even Cerberus, who really relies on the slow from his 2 to set up his 1, all lose value up against Panatom and Shinto. And then Netroid is super safe. And then Rongyu is on this Ganesh, which has been able to be a little bit more slippery than the Terra from last game. And look, Yarkor's level 18 and 5-0. Like, he's doing whatever he wants on this Ama. So this is just a composition from Sanguine that is really, really well equipped to deal with Radiance's draft. And I think Radiance tried to just do the same run back and get the exact same effect, but clearly Sanguine was able to adjust more than Radiance was ready for in the picks and bans.
A good adaptation for Sanguine, as Shinto, I think, is recognizing that Pyromancer being pulled by Radiance gets here in time to force them to drop it. Had a ward right on top of that Pyromancer, so Sanguine certainly knew the whole time. They're just going to start cleaning up the map a bit here. Tier 2 tower in mid, that comes down. Big Man Tings is pushing out the wave in right, and I like this. Would ordinarily make it a bit harder for them to get the tier 2, but when they're all 5-man stacked, it's not going to make a difference at all. This tier 2 tower comes tumbling down as well, and now Sanguine have fully expanded that lead out to 9k. They have not spent all of it, but they're certainly in control now.
Yeah, this one, I mean, 10k before 19 minutes, that's kind of nuts, it feels like. Not quite 10k, but basically right there. And we were just saying it was a 3k lead at 15 minutes. So in the last 4 minutes, they've tripled that lead, which is very, very impressive. And that's what Sanguine really did a whole lot of in Phase 1, which is give us an inch, we take a mile very, very effectively. This team having the capability to blow leads wide open more quickly than other teams, I think is a really good skill to have, because I'm just a big fan of pressure in general in MOBAs, but especially pressure that feels cascading like this is very difficult to stop.
Nice individual play from Cyclone Spin. I know the Fields of Love doesn't catch out Panatom, but taking the beads away from a Mercury who oftentimes has to kind of go into the back line with that Sonic Boom ultimate is pretty big. Going to be way less safe for Panatom now.
And now Aurora just has to stand next to whoever's getting Sonic Boomed and immediately press 4, and he'll catch Panatom every time.
Kraken is used right around the Phoenix that forces them to back off. Yarkor is deep in the back line looking for Big Man Tings, but unable to complete the kill so far. Panatom makes his way back there, though, to clean things up, and somehow Yarkor is still standing in the back of the fight. Finally, Aurora able to collect him and get the shutdown bonus, but Aurora pays for it with his life as Netroid locks him down. There's the special delivery to prevent Benji from getting anything else. The 3-for-1 for Sanguine as they take care of the left side Phoenix.
Man, Sanguine hungry for that Titan, but I think that they're making the right call here to back it up because Cyclone and Adapting both have a lot of damage. If you can get this mid Phoenix, you've done enough for Sanguine, for sure.
We were worried about Panatom without these, but Yarkor did a great job attracting attention and creating space. That meant that he could throw those autos out freely, and what a big fight for Sanguine. Harder to get on-demand big crits than go and Rage Deathbringer back-to-back, but this Mercury is here. Great fight from Shito there as well. I mean, what do you need to see differently from Radiance on their next Phoenix defense, or are they just too far behind at this point?
Well, for starters, you can't Kraken the Ama with ultimate up still. I mean, that is just never going to find good value for Ting. So even if he connects with the middle of the Kraken, this build doesn't do anything on Kraken damage on frontliners. So it's just not worth the cooldown whatsoever. Ting's did a good job after that of surviving for a long period of time, but just juking around and moving a whole lot only matters if your team's able to capitalize on the other team having to overextend in order to kill you, and I think Sanguine did overextend pretty heavily. I mean, that was Crushing Wave that actually got the killing blow, I believe, on the Ting, so he got a lot of value out of his life, but with the way that Adapting has been unable to be effective in this game because of this upgraded shell from Rongyu, I feel like it's just been a little bit too difficult for Radiance to turn it around. But number one, first and foremost, I'm going to be looking at that Mage ultimate and finding a better target next time around for Radiance.
Not great there in that fight from Tings, at least in terms of the Kraken use itself, as Sanguine hanging out near the FG. They recognize Benji's here. Silence means that he cannot escape. Special delivery forces out the beads. Dash means that Benji makes it out of there for now, but Sanguine clearly hungry for these kills. And I don't know if anyone more so than Yarkor, who's been playing excellently for them on this Amaterasu. You know, he told me he really wanted to play the odd her, but when the Amaterasu's like this, they won't let it happen. As the fight kicks off, Dharmic Pillars and Cyclone Spins dead already, crushing wave from Shito. Flattens Big Man Tings as well. Eagles rally finds nothing. Sonic Boom here just to catch up, and Shito gets the knock-up, still alive with the double as Netroid puts Aurora in the dirt elsewhere. Triple kill for Shito. Full clean deicide for Sanguine. Let's go ahead and roll the tape and move on to Game 3, because Game 2 is done.
Wow, 23 minutes for Sanguine to absolutely crush Radiance for their first win of the week, because remember, they got swept by Space Station earlier on. Just a really good draft from them. I think that the way they executed it was really solid. I think Netroid getting that solo kill for First Blood was the best possible outcome for Sanguine in that early game, though, because it set this Cupid behind. It gave Netroid some confidence. I mean, when you're 4 levels down the entirety of game 1 and you finish the game 0-1 in like 1 or 2 or something like that, that doesn't feel very good for the player. So I think that him getting that solo kill was huge for Sanguine.
Yeah, especially when you know what those Sanguine comms are like, right? When anyone makes any kind of good play, they are happy to gas that up. Rongyu, I think, often leading that for them, but you know it's getting noisy in those comms when Cyclone Spin ends up falling to Netroid in the 1v1. Suddenly, we got a real competitive set on our hands, 1-1, as I get it back down to Dulcin.
Yeah, Sanguine, masters of bending our expectations at every turn here. They blow Radiance out of the water in 23 minutes. And you at home could be masters of bending the elements now in SMITE. We've got an Aang, Zuko, Coruscans, all on the different gods there in the Battle Pass, and then as you move through those tiers, a different variant on each of those skins. They look absolutely incredible, so if you haven't checked out the Avatar Battle Pass yet, you need to get in game now, and then tons of other stuff. You know, you get the icons, the globals, the ward skins, all that fun stuff. So the Avatar Battle Pass, certainly something worth looking at. Mifflin, let's talk about game number 2 here, though. This one lasts 23 minutes, and it wasn't particularly close when Sanguine got rolling.
I mean, you can't let Sanguine get in their zone, and they were certainly in their zone that game. You don't end a game that quickly without really playing it perfectly, and it seemed like they came in with a strategy. The entirety of the time, the Sanguine draft was fighting inside the solo lane around Yarkor because he had the strongest early game pick inside of Amaterasu. Everywhere else on the map, Shinto and Netru were just kind of warding up the jungle, making sure every time adapting, try to rotate in, they would immediately back up. I mean, no matter how many wards you have on the side of Radiance, if Mercury's walking out of base and just hitting the sonic boom clap down the tower line, you're not going to be able to avoid it, see it coming. I mean, it just worked out perfectly. And really, Radiance let Sanguine farm up to that late game relatively safely until that 15-minute mark point, and then Sanguine grouped up and won the match.
This was a massive bit of confidence building. I agree with the way Aggro words that there for Netrioid. And, you know, I think if you zoom out on this one and you look at Sanguine and the conversations we've had around them, you know, obviously we've been critical over the last couple of games because, you know, it hasn't been what we know Sanguine can do. This game is a perfect example of maybe why we've been somewhat critical, because this is what Sanguine can do, and Mifflin, a lot of it branching out of Yarkor on this Amaterasu in the solo lane.
Yeah, Yarkor was looking incredibly strong, but it's hard not to when you've got Ganesh and a Mercury just kind of sitting over there.
Right, it's always the jungler.
Entirety of the time. Yeah, I mean, not always the jungler, but this time it was the jungler, okay? I mean, it was a 3v1 lane against Benji for almost the entirety of the match, and Radiance didn't do anything to control the other side of the map, likely due to the fact that Netrioid did find that hugely impactful early solo kill against the Cupid. Cycle and Spin really wasn't allowed to do much over there. I mean, Soul Lane was already a lost fight because they had ward coverage, so every time adapting rotated over, it just fizzled out. Every time Panatom KO'd over, it resulted in a kill.
Yeah, the post-game stats as well. About as lopsided as you would expect in a 23-minute game. 3 kills spread evenly over Yarkor, Panatom, and Shinto. But the stats don't lie in this case, and the Sanguine boys absolutely run all the way over Radiance. And I think, you know, kind of to continue that conversation, Mifflin, after what Benji was able to do on Bellona in Game 1, and then even still kind of inched into this game a little bit as well. Bellona still, I think, looked okay despite a 1-4 slash line. I think maybe shows why Sanguine spent that much time over on that side of the map trying to keep that lane behind. So Bellona maybe starting to work her way into the meta, at least when Benji's playing it.
And it looked good. I don't know if you remember that one kill Benji picked up, but it was in a 1 versus 2, like trying to get dove on,
right.
Immediately turns it around. It's clean play, and that shows why they really did want to shut it down in the early game. But I think it really does come down to the fact that Radiance didn't try to win anywhere else on the map. It was almost as if they were trying to match the exact same pressure that Sanguine was bringing to the solo lane. We saw some counter rotations from Radiance. It just never really worked out for them.
Do you think it's time to move on from the Poseidon and Cupid here in Game 3 if you're Radiance?
I think the Cupid's fine. I think that Poseidon might need to be switched around a little bit. I mean, there's so many other incredibly strong artillery strike picks that aren't going to be completely reliant on those auto attacks. I know Ring of Akate is good, okay? I know Telkine's Ring is fantastic. I know you want to play those magical hunters, but if you really want to, we've already seen that Radiance is willing to play Kronos, who I would say gets way more value out of that build. I mean, you could still play gods like Merlin, you could still play gods like Raijin. I don't think you need to pigeonhole yourself just because recently Ring of Akate's looked really strong.
All right, one good game out of the Poseidon, one maybe iffy game here in Game 2, but in 23 minutes, not a whole lot's going to look good when you're on the losing end. Picks and bans will answer a few of the questions that we had here going into game number 3. So first off, hats off to Sanguine after a tough loss in Game 1, continuing to claw their way back in, and even that's somehow an understatement. Again, you know, sub 25-minute game, certainly hard to come by at the SPL level, so great performance there from Sanguine. Can you keep it rolling? Is the next big question. That's Radiance's first game loss of the phase, by the way, so another big milestone here to look at if you're Sanguine. But as we move into the ban phase, the first ban phase, Persephone continuing to be banned out, do you think that the Persephone ban obviously warranted? So we know she's a very good god. Why do you think she's let through so much, though, in week 1? I believe 5 times in particular we saw her in the first week. Was that sort of just the shifting sands of the meta, a lot of teams trying to figure out who belongs where, and Persephone was just kind of that first god that slipped through?
I think it also has to do not only with the shifting sands of the meta, but some of these things in the meta were very overvalued early on. We saw that Bakasura and Arachne are both gods that were seeing a little bit of bans, seeing a lot of picks. We haven't really seen them that much in weeks 2.
No.
I mean, there's magical hunters that just came into the meta that were absorbing a lot of the bans, or at least the priorities in the pick phase. We saw Morrigan seeing a resurgence as well. I think maybe Persephone just got a little bit overlooked, and like it happens in the SPL, you see a god overperform just a little bit, you're not going to see that god again. SPL players hate losing, so might as well not let that Persephone through.
Yeah, she did not underperform at all in the games where she was able to be played. So, ban phase remains largely, if not completely unchanged. After game number 2, Sanguine still putting a little bit of pressure onto Aurora, and then the first ban in that second phase for game 2 was the Khepri as well. I guess you got to agree with it, Mifflin. I mean, Aurora's just so good, whether it's Hercules or Yamoja specifically, that even forcing him down one step from them seems worthwhile.
It certainly worked out for Sanguine, man. Aurora didn't get nearly as much value on his pick into the game 2, so now he's likely going to have to fall down again if they don't decide to take something highly valuable in this first phase of picks. I mean, you still have gods like Khepri. Scarab's Blessing is going to be hugely impactful. You still have all these other picks that he can fall to, but because Radiance has to take these high-priority picks like Amaterasu, if they're going to keep prioritizing Cupid, if they want to get a mid laner early on, it's going to sacrifice a lot for that support. But I think Aurora's a player who's willing to make those sacrifices for his team because my man's got a deep god ocean. It doesn't really matter how many bans you send his way, he's going to play something at the top level.
That's right. Plenty of variety for Aurora in Phase 1, despite largely the same as Sanguine's doing here in the ban phase. Ganesh and Jingwei locked in once more from Sanguine, but that's going to open up the door for Neath here. Now, Mifflin, if we're kind of rolling back the tape, BMT was the Neath guy here for this Radiant squad. You build it a little bit more ability-focused. The World Weaver ultimate kind of hits for half of the HP as long as you're marking one of those squishies from Sanguine. So I think it's a strong pick here, and now Kronos as well, I believe, was Radiant, if I'm remembering correctly, is their 100% win rate. So an interesting, but I think the little bit of data we have is a strong duo here for Radiance.
Yeah, this Kronos most likely going to be piloted by Cyclone Spin. We might get to see another 17-minute Fire Giant solo. Cyclone being the sole Kronos abuser in the game right now. No one else is playing this god.
Week 1, game 1.
Week 1, game 1, easy Fire Giant for the boy. But this god has such a high degree of variance. If you're able to shut him down in the early, he's one of those magical ADCs that really doesn't hit his power spike as early on. You need more than just Ring of Hecate, as crazy that sounds to say for this magical hunter, to really pop off. He's going to want that demonic grip, some additional penetration, a lot of power. But he might be the strongest late-game mage ADC, even stronger than Freya, as long as he's got that 2 ability locked down perfectly. I'm worried about this Neath, though. It underperformed the last couple times we've seen it, but it really does come down to who are you going to pair with it in the jungle. Someone who can really make use of that Spirit Arrow is going to make Neath look good. If we see him go towards another god like Nemesis or another late-game hypercarry who can't use that Neath ult in the early, it's going to get very low value, and Neath gets a little bit worse the later the game goes on.
I do kind of want to flip the script as well. I mean, it's pretty telegraphed how this Neath wants to play, given that ultimate. So is there anything that Sanguine now realize? I mean, it's a pester. You get hit by that ultimate, and you're taking a lot of your health. You have to beads if you still got him. Otherwise, you're stunned and kind of ripe for the picking here if you're going up against Neath, especially in the hands of Radiance. If you're Sanguine, is there anything you're taking into consideration now and maybe changing a strategy given that it's a Neath that's locked in?
Normally when you have this type of god who's just trying to be that annoying pick who makes it really hard to fight everywhere else, it forces you to lock it down and really try and run down the Neath. But when you have a hypercarry like Kronos in the squad as well, Sanguine have to divert their attention a little bit. They have to take the fight where this Neath is going to get value out of her ultimate, because if you let Kronos free farm, he's going to win the game on his own. So I think, really, it's kind of a checkmate situation. Well, you want to focus my Neath? Sure, she's not getting value out of the ultimate, but, Cyclone Spin's level 18 already, so you might just lose every fight. You want to focus the Kronos and try and shut him down in the early? Well, here's a Spirit Arrow, hold that. It's going to be hard to deal with.
Right. Absolutely. Going to be so difficult to deal with, especially when you have a Hunbats on Radiance as well. So I think Adapting and Co. have absolutely gotten themselves the draft that they can be happy with moving in here to Game 2, and I think that's something we've certainly made clear from our standpoint. But let's talk about Sanguine's draft here a little bit. Obviously, the Ganesh and the Jingwei, same as Game 2. Saw a lot of value out of both of those picks in our previous game. Hebo, Naja, Kulkullen, though, to round out your draft. What do you think about what Sanguine have picked up?
Sanguine look like they're running the exact same strategy as Game 2, just with a little bit of different pieces. They want Panatom to get involved. They want him to be able to control the pace of the game like he did in Game 2. But the pieces are still equally strong. Netrioid is going to be incredibly safe in that long lane, so if you expect him to be left alone, that's the best god you want him on. Hebo, if he's allowed to free farm, which he should be into this Neath, he's going to be a late-game hyper carry who's going to be able to deal with this Chronos incredibly well. Not easy to rewind time from the grave. Kulkullen should be able to lock down that lane very easily. Sanguine have a very good draft here, but I'm not sure that Radiance are going to allow them to play it the same way. If Radiance decide to set the pace themselves, which they absolutely can with a Kuzenbo and a Hunbot, it's going to be much harder for Sanguine to make it to that point of the game where they're able to group up and take on these team fights.
Are we still in kind of coin flip territory here? Whoever shows up, you think got it, all is considered equal? The drafts on both sides?
Look, I love Chronos as a pick, man. I think I got to favor Radiance just a little bit.
We'll have to see if Cyclone Spin can forge the Chronos into victory one more time. Radiance versus Sanguine. Let's get us a winner.
How could these top two teams end up any other way? I don't know if top two 100% right there, but these top teams making it all the way to a game number 3 with a different look here this time. Aggro Aurora, again, having to reach deep into the God Pool, has come up with the Kuzenbo this time. Cyclone Spin back on the Chronos. What do you make of the draft from Radiance this time?
I think it makes sense. When you see Sanguine prioritize their duo lane really early by going Jingwei Ganesh right at the top, I think that you look at the way Radiance was looking to play the lane early on in this game, or in this set rather, with the Cupid and the Emoja and just jam pressure. If Sanguine are going to pick this composition that is more difficult to punish, more difficult to zone, then let's just try and outscale them with the Kuzenbo and the Chronos. Because, look, Jingwei Ganesh aren't going to, run it down that lane. They aren't going to be able to pressure us super effectively. So let's just play for the later stages. And I think that identity still makes a lot of sense for Radiance here. I like the adjustment.
Should put Radiance in a good spot. Not the only place, though, we're seeing some adjustments. Big Man Tings this time is playing the Neath. I think we saw the Poseidon both games in a row, both times skewing more towards getting value out of the basic attack as opposed to the abilities, but this time he's on Neath, so should be able to get value out of both the abilities and the auto attacks and hopefully have some pressure here in mid.
We've seen Neath get a little bit more popular. She's been mostly in mid lane. I think Zapman played her once in duo and struggled with it pretty well. So I think that we'll see her mostly in mid when you have these magical ADCs over on the side. And I think that Neath is still really strong. I know that Hurwind really struggled with it yesterday in the way that those ultimates were working out for them. But Big Man was able to really leverage this pick well a couple weeks ago. So I think that it is a strong pick that's worth going for in the mid lane. I do think it can struggle up against something like Hebo that just does so much damage and can kind of chase you through your backflip pretty effectively that it is a bit concerning. But overall, I think that Radiance have a pretty well-rounded draft. They don't have a big team fight mage ultimate anymore, but they have the Yama for themselves. I like that takeaway here for Benji. They've got a great team fighting ultimate in Fear No Evil, and then just a ton of auto attack damage coming from Tink and Cyclone.
Yeah, and you talk about how good the Fear No Evil ultimate is here, and yet I think this is our first game where Wrong You doesn't pick up the Purification beads. I suppose he's not that worried about it here this time. I don't think it's quite as damning maybe as getting pulled in by the Dodge E or some of these other ultimates he's had to contend with so far this set. So Wrong You instead goes with that upgraded shell right away and hopes that this gives them a little bit of extra value. I'm assuming up against the Chronos and the Neath.
It's just that you're not really prioritizing Blink super heavily on Ganesh. He's not exactly the ideal Blink support anyways. And Shell is just the best early value that you can get out of a Relic because that HP that it provides in the early laning phase is so much more impactful early on because it makes a difference between dying and being able to eat 4 more autos between the block stacks and the actual HP of the Shell. So it's pretty common to see these supports rush things like Shell early on because they're just so safe whenever you get aggressed on.
Should keep wrong you in a fine spot here. This game also starting off a little bit on the slower side as opposed to game 1 really is all we want to compare it to, where Radiance had pressure basically everywhere, and so far what's really felt like the biggest difference maker to me is that they've kept Aurora off the Emoja and the Hercules. It hasn't allowed him to drive the pace. I mean, he certainly still played well. Aurora's not out of the game, but there's certainly a big difference between the Hercules and the Emoja constantly running at you all game long, and then the Cerberus and the Kuzenbo, who are more looking for teamfight presence.
Yeah, but that's such a big deal. As speaking of big deals, Yarkor gets ganked on the right-hand side and killed with some help from, what do you know, a World Weaver from Big Man Tings that came in and set up that kill based on Tings' assist there. That's exactly what should be happening with every World Weaver in the early game, but it is such a huge advantage for Radiance that Aurora, as one player, has 2 picks that you can't let him get, or else you feel like you have instantly lost the game. That warps picks and bans so dramatically that it really doesn't matter what Aurora does, honestly, in games like this, in my mind, because Aurora has brought so much value to your team by getting both of those picks banned and opening up a really strong draft for you guys. I mean, it's such an advantage whenever you've got a player like Aurora on your side who commands that much respect in picks and bans.
Yeah, and if Sanguine were wrong, I'd stop them, but I don't think they are, man. You absolutely can't let Aurora have those picks, and you're right, it's a huge boon for Radiance just as a squad that Aurora is that much of a threat on those picks, and then obviously still nasty on some of these other picks he kind of has to default down to when he can't play those top tier ones, and it really poses a significant problem for Sanguine in terms of how much stuff they have to let through. They're not able to get quite as much as they would have liked with the Amaterasu taken early by Benji. Not a direct result of that, but still, they end up losing pressure elsewhere as Yarkor has already fallen behind a bit over here in solo.
We haven't seen a lot of Cucullin yet here in Phase 2, but I think we saw one other game, and it also did not look particularly impressive to me. I think that there is a build that can work. I think that we haven't seen a whole lot of mystical mail over there for Cucullin quite yet, and I feel like it should be pretty strong against a lot of these squishier options that Soul Laners are building. Soul Eater second item, Berserker second item. I imagine that just because they're so much lower on protections than they used to be, that the mystical would allow you to out-trade pretty effectively, but we haven't seen a whole lot of Soul Laners going for it. I'm sure it's not for lack of trying, so they must be experiencing something or seeing something that I'm not over there in that solo lane, but the Cucullin we've seen has not been particularly successful, and when you're already down to the Ama in this lane, not really Yarkor's fault, because again, the Nethal is pretty important, but still.
Dharmic Pillars, though, do come out. They were trying to lock down with the Panatom Sash as well as the Dharmic Pillars, but not quite able to get it. They get the beads out from adapting, though, and the Fear No Evil, so perhaps he'll be a little bit more vulnerable, though, later on, but Panatom's beads being down as well means it probably is leaning a little bit towards it.
I think that's still a pretty good trade for Sanguine overall, because the Windfire Wheels cool down a lot shorter than that of Fear No Evil, so junglers trading beads and ult should, in theory, be better for Sanguine than for Radiance, because they've got a window where their jungler will have ultimate, whereas Radiance does not. And I love Naja in conjunction with Ganesh, because it makes killing tanks with that Windfire Wheels child's play, because you just put the Dharmic Pillars on the landing spot of Windfire Wheels, and because of that little mini knockup that happens when you come down, that guarantees the Ganesh remove obstacles CC chain, that guarantees a sash for Naja, that guarantees a silence then after the fact for Rongyu, and even Aurora, who has a long duration CC immune ult, almost certainly can't live through all of that because of all the prot shred that happens. So I really like that Rongyu has gone for the power boots this time instead of the tank boots that he had last time, and I think that we should see Panatom and Rongyu work pretty effectively together in this early game.
It's funny, you know, we usually talk about Najah being picked up in conjunction with some kind of big-time mage follow-up, but I think you're right to highlight that Ganesh can, and a lot of times, fill those same shoes, and in a world where that's not enough, they actually do have a big-time mage ultimate back there in the Shinto ultimate on Hopwa. Is Benji in danger of getting the kill here on the Yarkor again? Well timed on the ultimate for no CC, but just doesn't matter. Big Man Tings doing too much damage. That's 2 kills now into solo on the back of this World Weaver, and Sanguine don't have an answer.
And that's why I was kind of incredulous when we saw United playing this and having so little success with the World Weaver, because it looks simple. It isn't as simple as it looks, I can promise you that. But when you've got Benji with a lead, and he just knows that he doesn't have to kill Yarkor. He just has to get Yarkor low, and Big Man will do the rest with that World Weaver. It's such a benefit. I mean, Tings hasn't left the mid lane yet. His feet haven't even touched the grass of the jungle, and he's 1-0-1. And there haven't been a whole lot of skirmishes in mid either, just the one. So it's just so frustrating when you're playing something like Hebo for Shinto, and you haven't messed up, but your lane opponent is still getting a whole lot of golden experience off of your teammates.
It didn't take much, did it, I feel like, for Neath to come back in. Maybe a little bit less viable in some of the traditional mages, a little bit of help to her in terms of direct buffs, and the ability hunter builds are pretty strong right now too. I think all of that kind of coming together means that you certainly can get some Neath value in certain situations. And how often, by the way, do we see laning phases where the Amaterasu has the early pressure over the opposition? She's not quite as weak in the early game as she used to be, but still, it's certainly not her calling card, as Sanguine have struggled to keep Yarkor on even footing. There's the Dharmic Pillars out from Rongyu. It should keep Cyclone spinning the boys zoned out while they come back and look towards purple, but really that's about all they get out of that.
Ult for buff, usually worth it, even at this point in the game, so I'm pretty okay with the way that Sanguine played that. Does mean that Panatom is a little bit less lethal without the threat of Rongyu's ultimate following up on his, but overall, still a pretty decent spot for Sanguine to be in. You really just have to watch out for when Benji starts to rotate, because Yarkor is now worth very little. We could easily see another World Weaver come over to the right-hand side. It looks like we are literally right now. But is this kill even worth that much for Radiance?
Yarkor does have the ultimate to avoid getting CC'd yet again. He has been under constant pressure over here in solo. Adapting, stepping up to the Chaos side jungle to strip away a bit of the farm as Yarkor continues to stand underneath the tier 1 tower. I think he's recognized not a lot of safe places he can go, as Shinto has to use beads. Crushing Wave narrowly gets him away from Aurora, what should have been a kill. And there's the Fear No Evil perfectly pinning Rongyu against the wall. Radiance maybe check the wallets, getting robbed a little bit on a couple kills there, but still certainly good pressure in the jungle.
Yeah, a little bit of an ambitious Fear No Evil there from Adapting, not anywhere close to having the damage to take down a full health support with that ultimate, but it's space earned by Radiance, right? They force 2 people to go back, they make sure that Sanguine does not feel comfortable stepping up, and then they head right towards Gold Fury because of the pressure that they've earned in mid and on that left-hand side. Nicely done there by Radiance.
And I think it creates a great conversation about where you can use your ultimates when you're trying to make objective play, because you could say maybe you want to save them to have around the objective for a fight, but if you use them this cleanly and Sanguine are that pushed out, you don't even need any when you come over towards the Fury, because there's just no way Sanguine can come in to contest. Another excellent early game for Radiance here so far, and so far it seems like the team that comes out of these first 15, 16 minutes or so ahead is just the team that's going to end up winning it here. Neither one of these teams are going to drop a lead once they have it. You got to make sure you're not letting yourself fall too far behind early.
It's been the trend so far in this set, but not necessarily for the overall season. We've seen, I think, a lot of comebacks.
Agreed.
But maybe with some midseason changes or just the way that these 2 teams have played. That being said, the leads that have been pretty exorbitant when it comes to this set. I mean, it was
right.
A 4K lead at 12 minutes, a 3K at 15. Those are pretty big, but it looks like Radiance is kind of on pace for them this game, doesn't it?
Sanguine hard committing. Cyclone Spin has to use beads, and Aegis still will not save his life as he tries to get the rewind off. So Sanguine can still hard commit for a kill here and there. They're not entirely out of this one just yet, and if they are able to get this tower, maybe a little bit more pressure, they can start to close the gap a bit. But Adapting and Aurora rotating over, so Sanguine might end up having to give up on this.
pretty greedy there by Cyclone Spin on the relic usage, and that's a cardinal sin for a carry to be super greedy with their relics, and that's really the exact opposite of what Radiance needed, though maybe this will help. Shinto dead to rights underneath this big tower.
No way you're getting away from dazzling offensive there, so Shinto takes a seat, didn't even have Beads to help out. Fear No Evil coming out from adapting as they've been able to lock down Panatom on the left-hand side, barely able to make his way out of that one, but that is the Beads now on cooldown for the Naja player for Sanguine, as Radiance are now the ones moving around the jungle with this extra presence from their solo laner who's ahead. That's been kind of another trend in this game here so far, or these sets.
Has been, and both games that have been won by each team have really been controlled effectively by their solo laner. One with Ama, looking like it might be a second with Ama so far. I mean, look at the itemization advantage for Benji in this lane. Excuse me, he's got a tier 2 Kusari over Yarkor entirely, and he's missed the last few waves over there in solo because he has been rotating around. I mean, he's up well over 1,000 gold, closer to 1,600 gold in the lead over Yarkor right now, and that's all by himself. The lead is about that right now for Radiance, actually, when you check on the overall team, so that's both a blessing and a curse. It means that the lead is all kind of in one area. It's very easy for Benji to come over and win a team fight by himself for Radiance with this sort of lead, but if Sanguine are able to pick a fight without Benji rotating, or Yarkor is able to get there first and Benji is still pushing, then this game is closer to even than it really looks.
It is, as Radiance have put a lot of their eggs in the Benji basket. Only problem for Sanguine is that's an excellent basket, I think, to have your eggs in. He's been one of the most consistent solo players across his career, man, certainly in the conversation for just one of the best ever, as Tings just kind of charging up the ultimate. No real look, I don't think, at fire is there. But this is starting to become a bit of an issue for Sanguine. They got to make sure this lead doesn't expand too much further from this. But Radiance heading over towards Pyromancer are going to do exactly that, expand it out. So that's why they need this kill onto Cyclone Spin in left. The rewind comes out for him. He is able to try and escape topside, but with Panatom here as well, Cyclone Spin is going to fall eventually, but maybe so will Shinto. Benji diving underneath the mid-tier 2 tower, able to cut down the Hopwa.
And Cyclone just buys as much time as he possibly can, gets some damage off, and Adapting was looking to maybe blink in with that Fear No Evil, but no beads for him, so this is sketchy.
Our core not quite able to lock down. Now Radiance stacked up as 4 makes it a lot less appetizing, I think, for Sanguine to push in. They have managed to keep this Chronos in check, but this has gone almost exactly the way the desk was talking about it. You have this difficult choice about where you go to try and establish some pressure here on the map, and Sanguine have only been able to keep down the Chronos. They still have this Amaterasu and this Neath to worry about.
And it's not like this Chronos is going away overall. I mean, yeah, you've done a good job of managing it in the early stages of the game, but eventually he's just going to get stronger whether or not you're killing him, because the minutes on the clock keep going up, and the minutes on the clock give him power every minute that goes by. So he's going to be good no matter what. It really feels like now Sanguine's task is to weather the storm of Benji's lead on that right-hand side. If they can do that, then I think that they've got a chance to win this game.
They do, because they still have a ton of kill potential, but Sanguine starting up the Fire Giant at this point. It won't be a secret. Radiance are on the way, and the Fire Giant ends up dropped. Radiance get over there just in time to slow this all down, and that was risky at best. Now it looks like Cyclone Spin going to take the Primal Fury down to his own. Meanwhile, Yarkor in some trouble as well, as Benji goes to the dazzling offensive. That does manage to lock down Panatom, but the turnaround damage is there. Benji has fallen, but Fear No Evil stops the chase. Sanguine can't continue pushing in here at this point. Look at these health bars.
Yeah, a little bit too low. I just think a bit of a miscommunication there between Benji and the rest of Radiance. That World Weaver came in, Yarkor was going to be very, very low, within one ultimate for sure there from Radiance, but Sanguine just had a good angle in order to close that gap, and I don't know that Radiance communicated that well enough. Maybe Benji didn't listen to that communication well enough and got a little bit baited, but a good retreat by Yarkor back towards his team. But that left open Cyclone Spin to solo out that Fury. So certainly a position that Radiance is okay with.
Right, I mean, you just look at those charts Doug pulled up for us. It ended up relatively even on the back of all that happened over on the right-hand side. So Sanguine still can't feel too great about it, but as he said, even keeping it even, I think, is kind of a mini win here for Sanguine. There's so much pressure from Benji right now, the lead they've established on that solo side, that Sanguine are still in defensive mode, at least for a little bit longer, and then they can start to fight back in on more even terms.
Definitely, and in the way that Netrioid has been able to farm, he's level 18, he's catching up, he's got a level and a half lead over Cyclone right now. That's a win condition and a legitimate one for Sanguine. So if they can just continue to keep at this pace, I think they'll be A-okay, because this is about the same lead that Radiance had at 13 minutes, you know, a good 5.5 minutes ago. So it has kind of flatlined a little bit, at least for now.
Benji again getting aggressive on the Yark core. That Frostbound build means that the dash in can't just be ignored. He is sticking on you with that slow, and you got to do something about it. The Salmon Leap easily allowed Yark core to reposition. So now things have kind of slowed down. Radiant's not sure exactly where they want to go to try and force out this lead. They got the tier 1 tower in solo. That's one of the easy objectives you can get. Cyclone Spin just got the Fury only about 2 minutes ago. That one is down as well. Pyro not even up. As far as expanding this lead out right now, Radiants don't even have a ton of options. They're kind of biding their time.
I think it's tier 1 and mid is the most viable option for them. It's already been poked below half. But who cares about that? Let's get the big one.
Right. They're gonna start up this Fire Giant. Cyclone Spin is here, but so is all of Sanguine. Wronghew is in there, should be able to relay the information. The Fire Giant's at half. Benji gets locked down first. Spirit Arrow comes in, and Wronghew has taken away too much damage. First kill of this excursion goes to Radiance. Fear No Evil locks down Yarkor as well, and Shinto and Netra never got to put a point of damage in to this fight until the front line had already fallen.
Oh.
There's the crushing wave, but Cyclone Spin avoids it. Finally able to get him with those water hands, so it ends up 2 for 1, but Sanguine have to make sure, man, that they're able to get the rest of the squad there all at once.
Shinto nearly ended up getting turned on there. Cyclone just a little bit off the mark after the fact, but some fancy footwork for him for sure to sidestep that crushing wave. And you just see the effectiveness of the front line for Radiance is so much higher right now than that of Sanguine's, because Yarkor and Wronghew both get insta-killed by Radiance, and Aurora just created so much space with that watery grave. It is so difficult to withstand that as a frontliner, because it just tosses you around. I mean, no CC immunity at all for Wronghew. Yarkor has the 2 instances of it on the ults on each form, but that's not exactly easy to time in terms of that watery grave, especially with how long duration it is. So just very, very disruptive fight there from Aurora, which is exactly what you want out of the Kuzenbo.
It's true. A lot of the times with Kuzenbo, it can almost feel like a silence that ult is coming, because it's so hard to cast. Even in between those knockups, you're so constantly being pushed that unless you can be a little bit preemptive, it's tough to get out of it and get max value out of it there. The only upside for Sanguine there is that they don't allow the Fire Giant to go down, but Radiant still expand that lead out ever so slightly with those kills. As long as Sanguine can get there on even footing, we see they've got the damage output between Shinto and Netroid. They're certainly swinging. They just have to make sure they're there at the same time as Yarkor and Wronghew, or that Wronghew and Yarkor can survive a bit longer so the squad can show up.
I think diving Netroid this game is going to be pretty difficult, just based on how much damage he's already been able to put out in this game. And Benji's build is really good when it comes to chasing people down and getting isolated 1v1s, but I just don't think he can ever actually 1v1 Netrioid. With this build, it just does, there's so much crit damage coming through from the Jing Wei, and Benji doesn't have a Nemean Lion or a Spectral Armor quite yet, so that's really going to be a tough matchup, I think, here for Radiance to try and get onto this Jing Wei effectively. Hunbats is one of the characters I think best equipped in order to do it, because of the ability to teleport on the Sacred Monkey, the fact that once he gets 5-6 items online, he has one of the fastest kill combos because of how fast the auto cancels are. You blink, ult, auto, 3 auto. If they only beads that didn't Aegis, they're basically dead to that amount of damage, and then your 2 is guaranteed after the fact.
Benji does pick up the Spectral as advised. The Oni Fury is down even lower. Aurora is the frontliner trying to zone. There's the Watery Grave for the disruption, and Oni Fury has been dropped for now, but Yarkor steps over to the left to keep the members zoned back out. Radiance consider pulling the Oni Fury again, but Sanguine's so enough presence that it has to be dropped.
Aurora that time just tried to go a little bit too deep and really got focused very, very effectively by Sanguine. A body block by Rongyu on that World Weaver didn't hurt either.
No World Weaver this fight for Radiance or Watery Grave. Sanguine still have most of their ultimates except for Yarkor, who had to use his when he transformed. Oni Fury pulled again by Radiance. All the relics available for both sides as well, except the Thorns down there for Aurora. So this should be a fairly heads-up fight, but Radiance go back in again. There's the Dharmic Pillars as Rongyu gets pulled in towards Radiance, but he makes that alive, though low HP. Panatom low as well, and now he doesn't have the bead, so the Fear No Evil, so patient from adapting, is well placed. Radiance able to grab the Fury. They get the first kill on the Rongyu. Panatom and Shinto both critically low as well, as Benji gets the double kill, and Sanguine are on the run. What a patient fight there from Radiance as they perfectly punish Sanguine.
Beautiful. A great ultimate from Yarkor is actually going to let him escape because that gives him enough rage to transform as well. But is that enough space earned by Radiance to actually go for Fire Giant? They aren't that healthy here.
Netroid has dashed in. He will be getting a little help here from Yarkor. Benji uses the bead to get away from the root from Yarkor, and Netroid gets controlled by Aurora. They get the kill into Benji though, but Netroid has fallen as in comes Big Man Tings. Yarkor Panatom gotta back up as Radiance start to step a bit further forward. Without Benji, the FG does get a little bit harder. Shinto will be back up in 15 seconds. Maybe Sanguine has done enough to keep themselves on life support.
Absolutely. And Netroid dies, but does his job, because in the overall grand scheme of that little snippet of the game, Sanguine's job was to keep Radiance from securing Fire Giant. Netroid giving his life likely does just that. It looks like Radiance might try and just brute force their way in anyways, but now at least you bought time for the rest of the team to get up and healthy. Shinto can actually be here for this fight.
Still going to be a really tough defense. Only Rongyu and Panatom are here at first. There's the Dharmic Pillars. Put them in a bad spot. Panatom does get pushed, but not that far because of the Dharmic Pillars. But that is the Windfire Wheels on cooldown now for Panatom, along with the Dharmic Pillars on Sanguine. So they lose a lot of their big team fighting ultimates, just keeping that Fire Giant standing. But they bought themselves some time. Sanguine should be here for the next one.
Relic situation is not great right now for Radiance, though. Tings just used the beads. It's a little bit better because you don't have to worry about that Windfire Wheels from Panatom with that being on cooldown, but overall, it's not an easy fight here for Radiance.
Whoa, Sanguine are committing. I think they recognize Aurora's a little bit too far forward, but now it's Yarkor that's in a bad spot. There's the dash from Aurora, not getting a lot of value. Aurora's been rooted, and the damage is not coming through fast enough. Finally, Yarkor gets the kills, but the crits from the backline of Radiance are proving too strong. Solo goes down for support as Sanguine have to start falling back.
Sanguine, again, a little bit low, but have good tools to turn this one around. Dharmic Pillars coming back up, as is Windfire Wheels. Whereas, again, Radiance pretty low in the ultimate department. Sanguine's staying split enough that now that they aren't getting completely wrecked by these Fear No Evils and Watery Graves. It happened a little bit on the last fight, on that Gold Fury, where they grouped up a little bit too much, and it's no coincidence that they get completely wiped pretty much in that fight, and they get really blown out in it. Whenever they group up, they're getting zoned by Watery Grave or just destroyed by Fear No Evil. In fights like that, where they're able to stay a little bit more separate, make that Fear No Evil be a more teamfight divider instead of hitting everybody really effectively, is a lot easier for Sanguine to then push forward and capitalize on trying to help someone like Yarkor going down.
Sanguine have done a great job, though, of kind of leveraging their lives, so to speak, into keeping this game close. And really, Radiance did a great job of expanding the lead anyway. It was 5,000 or so when all of this started, but it has crept up now closer to 10,000, 9,200. The experience difference not quite as relevant anymore now that we're across the 27-minute mark. It's really all about that itemization and how far into their build pass they are. But Sanguine desperately trying to hold on, it feels like, here in Game 3.
And they're in a bad spot, but maybe Rongyu is in the worst of them all as he's being chain slowed by Benji. Here comes adapting as well. That's a dead elephant.
Yeah, the Dharmic Pillar's not enough to keep Rongyu alive in that spot. They commit 3 ultimates, though, the Dazzling Offensive, the World Weaver, and the Fear No Evil, all to make sure they take Rongyu out of this fight, and he's only dead for 30 seconds. Sanguine might still be able to defend, but they're frontline light in this next battle. Keep an eye on Panatom trying to lurk around the back of the fight, but Tings recognizes that there's the sash, gets the beads out from Big Man Tings. Panatom has to use beads of his own. Meanwhile, Aurora is way in the back of the fight, gets his dash interrupted, and now his life has been forfeit. Sanguine continue to find trades.
Aurora just a little bit too deep right there, and without ultimates, Benji and adapting can only do so much to really assist in that backline dive. Feels like Aurora has just been a little bit overconfident with the positioning a couple times now in these fights.
Fire Giant dropped again as Radiance consider starting it up, but this is really exactly what the Dark Doctor ordered for Sanguine. At this point in the game, realistically respecting Radiance and how well they're going to play these Fire Giant fights, I think this is about as well as these last 8 or so minutes could have gone for them as they continue to buy time. They don't allow Radiance to find that Fire Giant. If we can get past the next minute and 30 seconds to the 30-minute threshold, it's going to be that much harder for Radiance to get the enhanced version. But Shinto's been cut out. That's Benji, a solo agent working to catch him, getting that crushing wave on cooldown. Not enough for the kill, but that's the Aegis on cooldown now as well. Still good work from Benji.
I love the way that Radiance has been using this Neath ultimate because it does lose so much value later on in the game. What they're doing is they're just sending Benji alone out into the enemy jungle and kind of playing corners, waiting for someone to show up, and then they just immediately have Ting's ult, whatever target Benji's on, and it forces Sanguine to be a little bit paranoid about their pathing. It's going to force them to waste wards in their own jungle that maybe they wouldn't have needed elsewhere. And now it's putting them in a position where their big damage dealer come late game in this Hebo has no relics and no ult walking into a firefight. This should be an absolute pull by Radiance on this fire. I think you've got to take advantage of it.
Especially considering they just collected the Primal Fury on the back of that pressure onto Shinto. So they say it's going to end up being the Enhanced Fire Giant. We're only 15 seconds out. No way they can burn it that quickly. That is going to make life a lot harder for the team with the lead, being Radiance, as Sanguine continue to hover nearby. Fire Giant has been pulled. No relics for Shinto in the backline, so this is a risky fight for the Habois. Watch his positioning as Aurora with the Watery Grave looks to disrupt, but Fire Giant's been leashed. Adapting gets to Shinto with the Fear No Evil, and that is it for the Habois. Yarkor barely gets the transformation off in time as the crits were coming out from Big Man Tings, and Yarkor falls as well. They do manage to collect Benji way in the back, but a 2-for-1 for Radiance has to have them feeling good.
Absolutely perfect by Radiance, but it's not over yet. This Enhanced Fire Giant's going to be difficult to take down.
Sanguine have to play this fight perfectly. Panatom has so much pressure on him, but he gets collected. Windfire Wheels has to be used defensively, and that's a lot of their kill potential lost. They really needed him to find Cyclone Spin or Tings in the backline and maybe get past those beads for a kill, but now Radiance fully resetting. 18 more seconds on Shinto till he's back out.
Man, just perfect execution by Radiance. I've been really impressed with the way that they and Big Man Tings, of course, in particular, have used this Neath in the late game because they did it as well the last time they played this pick. Normally at this point in the game, that Neath ultimate is the lowest value you could basically get on your team. But Tings is just playing out of vision, sitting back with that ultimate pre-charged, and waiting with deep wards in the enemy jungle. They caught Shinto by himself by a blue buff, just Neath ulted him. It did 60% of his, or 40% of his health. Then Adapting just blinks in, drops a max range Fear No Evil, teleports to the monkey, and one-shot Shinto. Shinto didn't get to play that last team fight, and it's all because of the previous work put in by Benji and Tings before that. That was really nice.
I understand they're executing that ult well, but you have to think, with this big of a lead that they've had now for 11 minutes, Sanguine have kept this incredibly close, way closer than I would have been able to give them credit for. Some of that is that it's just flat out hard to do the Fire Giant in close matchups, but a lot of it is because Sanguine have played right up against the margins and forced Radiance to go the distance here to this point. It's been an excellently played set by both teams so far, but only one can come out the victor as the Fire Giant dance falls back again. Keep your eye on Tings. When he's charging that ultimate, you know Radiance is ready to go.
And that's why with that ultimate now on cooldown after getting very little value, Radiance is going to back it up right away and not try and force a fight, because that's really been their fight starter more often than not. I got to give a lot of credit, by the way, to Panatom, who I think has had a fantastic Najah game. It's not a lot of damage, but he's been very disruptive.
Aurora blinking in first. Rongyu uses the silence to keep him at bay. The frenzy popped as well as Netroid gets targeted out by Benji and the Fear No Evil, but immunes it all. Benji keeping the battle up with Panatom on the left-hand side, but Sanguine have done a great job to repel this aggression from Radiance so far. That's the Aegis, though, on cooldown for Shinto, Shell, and Frenzy down for Rongyu, and the beads for Netroid. The back line is what's going to be vulnerable for Sanguine in this next FG fight.
Big Man's got that ultimate up again, so don't be surprised if he just takes a knee right here and looks for a target.
He's already got it charging, Aggro. You're exactly right. As soon as he recognizes someone on their own, he's letting that ultimate fly. But Sanguine start to step forward. Even still, they refuse to relent. Shinto taking his back, adapting as well. We got ourselves a full reset, but Radiance cannot seem to break this stalemate. I mean, at what point are we getting to the point where it's back to parity? I mean, a lot of these characters are full slotted, except for Yarkor, who's still a good bit behind.
I feel like the reason the Radiance is having so much trouble is because they're so committed to this backline dive. They're leaving Cyclone Spin to full tank fire all by himself. And it's worked in the past, but Hecate a little bit worse now.
Right.
With Enhanced Fire Giant, it just doesn't seem to be working for Radiance. Cyclone's getting too poked by the actual objective in order to stay on it for an extended period of time. And Big Man is oftentimes looking down the scope instead of helping auto attack on that Fire Giant. Maybe Benji should be maybe helping more on FG than diving, but then that takes Big Man's effectiveness with that ultimate away. It's difficult to balance and juggle all of the different balls that Radiant's trying to juggle right now, but it's really been the lack of effective frontline tanking on fire here for Radiance that's made it pretty impossible for them to ultimately get it.
Yeah, well, I like this awareness from Radiance. Name a better duo than Sanguine and taking the Oni Fury in the late game. They love to make plays around this Fury in particular when things start to stalemate. But that's why Radiance is here. But this battle can't afford to get as climactic as the Fire Giant when Radiance able to secure the Oni Fury. They'll now have those waves coming down all three lanes. But Sanguine are stepping on the gas. Fear No Evil forces them out. But Cyclone Spin have been grabbed by Panatom in the back. He needs some help. Gets the rewind off. That's huge as Aurora is low as well, but they full-on commit and Cyclone Spin goes down. Panatom falls as well, but look how low adapting is. Shinto can afford to keep stepping in with the rest of the boys because he's healthy as Radiance and Sanguine trade ADC for jungle.
And Panatom does his job yet again. It's been a lot of delaying for Panatom, being super patient with that ult, just keeping Radiance off of securing Fire Giant. That time he pulls the trigger much earlier on the Windfire wheels, catches Cyclone a little bit surprised, and Cyclone not able to get enough peel, even though the whole team tried to get in there. Cyclone also held the beads at the very end when he got sashed. I don't know that he would have lived, but has him up for the next fight at least.
But this is too bad from Sanguine. They did the full reset a little slower here than Radiance. So Radiance in the late game should be able to grab the Enhanced Fire Giant. Aurora is there for the zone, and Radiance finally able to break open this stalemate. And that changes the game a lot here, Aggro. Now, Radiance have a full claim to being on offense. Still some Oni mini waves in right and mid, and they've got EFG.
Just a bad mistake right there by
yeah, can't
Sanguine,
happen,
no doubt. You just cannot full 5-man reset. Even when you feel like, okay, we won that last team fight, and they did. They didn't win it cleanly enough to allow Radiance to have 4 people on the map without any sort of parental supervision on your side. And sure enough, Radiance find their way into trouble, as they often seem to, right on top of that Fire Giant. Good objective DPS between the Ama and the Neath, who not the best, but still an ADC at the end of the day, so still going to do some decent objective damage. Hunbats has pretty good objective damage as well with all the Hydras procs that he can get pretty easily, so a good window of opportunity seized by the veteran Radiant squad.
And catching Sanguine making a rare late game mistake, the kind that they don't miss, that they don't make. But still, you kind of got to admit that Sanguine are on a bit of borrowed time in this late game anyway. They fell pretty far behind towards that mid game, we first started getting into the late game, and were able to just hold on. Panatom played very well. Rongyu kept those fights separated. Netroid has plenty of damage. I doubt 37 minutes into the game they're going to make a hard commit on this tier 2 tower, but Sanguine are certainly pushed up. There's the World Weaver landing on a Rongyu, but not a lot of value out of it, so Sanguine can breathe a small sigh of relief.
Plenty of CDR there for Big Man, though. I mean, he's got 30% with a red pot, so not going to be too long until that's out.
But Yarkor's going in, and boy, is he paying the price. He gets blown up right away. Fear No Evil brings him right back the other direction, and Adapting gets the first kill of this fight on the tier 2 Sanguine. I just don't know about that one.
Agreed. What's the point of that tier 2? There's just no advantage to fighting there as opposed to here.
Right, I mean, that same play is much more effective here. Big knockup, though, coming out from Shinto, stepping up, knowing that there's isolation because of the Dharmic Pillars, but Cyclone Spin gets a great rewind off. Now Sanguine has to entirely fall back. Let Phoenix now opened a couple of uncharacteristic late-game mistakes, really starting to hinder Sanguine at this point.
I mean, that's just, there's just no point in defending the tier 2 because the terrain is more advantageous for you on your Phoenix. It's a better choke point. So speaking of choke points, how about that knockup by Netrioid, but Aurora not to turn.
Yeah, Aurora does push in, but he ends up falling. Great ultimate from Panatom. He retreats. There's the World Weaver, in case you all wanted more evidence of how much damage that's doing. Netroid down to half HP. But even though Radiance are on retreat, even though they lost Aurora here, I mean, this is definitely a good sequence for them. That left side Phoenix forever weakened. Fire minions that Sanguine have to worry about the furthest from the FG. The Radiance are still feeling good.
They are, but by the time Aurora spawns, there's going to be 10 seconds on their Fire Giant buff, so that's all they're getting is one left side Phoenix, and we've been Fire Giant dancing for 20 minutes. There was like 20 minutes whenever the first Fire Giant was pulled. So we got, out of that last 20 minutes, Radiance finally get the enhanced Fire Giant, and they only get one tier 2 tower and one Phoenix.
Wow.
The best Phoenix to get, but it's still only one.
Look at this, though, from Sanguine. They're getting aggressive, and Shinto has the wraparound, comes underneath, crushing wave, flattens Big Man Tings, and Cyclone Spin is putting out decent damage, but Shinto's still alive. Aurora is going to be back up in a moment, but Sanguine completely throwing out the playbook and trying something new. I don't know about Siege in this mid-Phoenix, though, fellas. This feels so risky.
It is, but no Fear No Evil there for Adapting, no relics whatsoever for Cyclone Spin. I don't mind the call.
Frenzy. I think they're going to go for this one, Ryan, and are they going to get a better opportunity? They might just flat out be correct. Netroid, though, is in trouble. Airstrike allows the reposition, and Shinto has fallen. Radiance making a big-time defense, Adapting with the double kill. Excuse me, Adapt King as he shuts down Panatom. Benji able to take care of Rongyu as well, and Sanguine overstepping in the late game might have just succumbed to Radiance. Yarkor still being chased out by the dazzling offensive. No World, he survives this. A delayed triple for the jungler for Radiance. They take care of game 3.
And Netrioid is just the final domino to fall for Sanguine. It's an interesting idea. I really don't think that you can be results-based oriented here, right? I mean, you just cannot look at the fact that it didn't work and say it was a bad idea. You can only go with the information that you have available at the time. It's risky for sure. You called it. They almost executed. They almost one-shot Cyclone Spin off Netrioid dashing in. And if they do one-shot Cyclone, that whole fight changes. But Adapting just did so much work on that backline dive, and that was really the story of this whole game, wasn't it? That Benji, Adapting, and Aurora were nightmares for Sanguine's backline to deal with. That even though Cyclone really had a very lackluster game on the Chronos, didn't really get to do a whole lot at all in that match, it didn't really matter because of how well that backline dive was synced for Radiance alongside that World Weaver from Big Man.
An impressive game, though, for Radiance, and their hot streak continues. I know they dropped a game here in this set, but as far as sets go, still undefeated here in Phase 2 and looking quite formidable. Also, I don't know how you chalk this one up for Sanguine. Still a much stronger late game, I think, than they had any right to, considering the gold deficit they were at around that 22-minute mark. Maybe it's still a good one for them.
Yeah, I think that after game 1, in the way that Sanguine really rolled over in that one, to come back, win game number 2, and then have a pretty impressive game number 3 overall. Look, Sanguine's past the point of moral victories. I think that this team has high enough expectations that is not really what's in their mind. But overall, this week, They trended down at the very beginning. At least at the very end, they've started to trend up again.
They're going to need to do a lot more of that, though, if they want to get back to where all our expectations are. Congrats, though, to Radiance on the win as they get it back down to the desk to break it down.
If the highlight of this one is the fact that Radiance lost their first game of the phase, I think Radiance must be doing something right now. 3-0 here in Phase 2 of the SPL, and for the first time, I believe this season in the SPL, Sanguine dropped down to negative in the win-loss column. They'll be 1-2 here after this one. But how do we get there, though, Mifflin? This one is 41 minutes long, almost double the amount of time as we had there in Game 2, and Radiance are able to run away with the win.
Radiance had a lead very early on. They were just kind of struggling in that team fight phase, which we can expect. Sanguine's not going to roll over and give you the dub for free, but I think it really does come down to the strategy of splitting up that aggression. You've got Cycle and Spin on this Chronos and Duo lane, who is able to absorb so much of Sanguine's attention that really Benji was allowed to do whatever he needed. Adapting was under zero pressure, going undying in the set, or not the set, the game rather. And BMT was getting insane value off of his ultimate. Every single fight that Radiance won in the early game had a Neath ult coming through, and then sometimes BMT would follow it up by coming himself, or maybe the fight was already over, but it just seemed like Sanguine lost to Radiance's strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair way of looking at it. I mean, keeping themselves in this set, I think, I agree with aggro beyond the point of moral victories, but also agree with aggro. Too much agreeing with aggro going on right now, but the trend sort of back upwards, the uptick of trending, I think, for Sanguine at the end of this one, so expect big things from them moving forward. But I think this is one, Mifflin, where maybe you start to look at the conversations we've been having around the Sanguine team and really need to shift that focus towards Radiance. It's not necessarily so much that Sanguine looked out of sorts today, the same way they might have last week, but this Radiance team has finally put all of their pieces together and need to be feared as potentially, I'm saying potentially, the top team in the league.
I'm glad that you said potentially, because Ghost Gaming still does exist,
Right,
but Radiance is looking a lot better. Yeah,
Right.
There's a lot of good teams, Dave, but put some respect on Ghost Gaming. But let's address Radiance. I think we saw what the coach said today, that really Radiance started to communicate with each other a lot more, talking about what they like to see in the team and what they need to improve on. And communication is one of the best facets to see improvement on a team-based game. If they are able to communicate what they need freely, these guys are going to continue to get stronger. And it seems like already their team play has been largely better for it.
True. Yeah, I guess potentially, they lost in 23 minutes in Game 2 here of this set, so maybe not quite a boon to my efforts. They are tied with Ghost, though, 3-0. SSG have a chance to make it a three-way tie up top with a matchup against Obey to round out our week here in the SPO. Ghost Gaming Radiance, though, up top at 3-0. And then, as mentioned, Sanguine dropped down to 1-2 so far in Phase 2 of the SPL. So an uphill climb here for them. We will round out our weekend here, Mifflin, with SSG against Obey. In a moment, we'll be able to jump to an interview, but at some point I'm going to have to question what you're wearing there, because something has suddenly looked different. It's Obey, and that's what you voted for, right? You put Obey here for this matchup?
Look, Dave, I'm going to break it down for you the only way I can, because when you talk about Obey, if you're talking about them winning, we can't review the stats. We can't talk about what's actually happened. We've got to talk about the raw potential of this squad. And you know what? When you're at the bottom, there's only one direction to go, Dave. Do you know what that is?
Cutting the league down by one more team.
No, it's up, Dave. They're going straight up. They're going to start finding some wins now, Dave. I'm going to give them my energy. We got to big up the boys. And you know what?
Right.
To the other 10 people in the world, in the chat, wherever you are, if you voted for Obey as well, please support them here, because they're going to need it going against SSG, one of the best teams in the league.
Mifflin, I'm cutting off your Obey bias here. Big Man Tings, the big winner from this set. Yeah, don't forget, Radiance still undefeated here up to this point. 3-0 now in Phase 2 of the SPL. Let's take a listen and hear how BMT's feeling.
That's right, Dawson. I am indeed here with Big Man Tings, the one with the big Neath ults, especially there in that last game. Talk to me a little bit about what that synergy is like, because you're the one kind of enabling, I think, Benji to have such a monster game. Just take me a little bit through what those comms are like.
I'm just always looking to ult a carry, basically. Benji's always looking to dive the backline. I'm always just trying to help him out. He just calls a target, and I do my best to hit an unmissable ult.
Well, you all are off to another hot start to a phase, not unlike phase 1. I don't think you guys have to remain undefeated to have a good phase by any means, but what are you all going to be trying to do to make sure you don't have maybe that same sort of slump you had in the middle of phase 1?
I think during phase 1 we were still working on some things internally, I would say, but towards the end of that phase and MSI, I think we definitely started working in progressing in the right direction. We just got to keep that up, keep improving what we know we need to improve on, and hopefully that keeps showing in phase 2.
Well, Tings, you've pretty quietly had a 6 season 7, I would say. I don't think that your name comes up quite as often as it should. Any part of you maybe wishing there was a little bit more of the love coming directly towards you, or are you just happy as long as Radiance is doing well?
I mean, if people want to praise me, they can. At the end of the day, it's just winning. At the end of the day is the main thing, and progressing, going towards Worlds. I'm just going to keep performing as I do and keep trying to play better each step that goes on. So that's the plan.
Well, really not much else you can do. Thanks for taking some time, Big Man Tings. Always fun to get to watch you. We got another set coming up after this. Mifflin not be the only person rooting for an Obey victory here in this very next one.